Good morning. I'm Kenyon McDuffie, at-large council member and chair of the Council Committee on Business and Economic Development. Today is Wednesday, March 12, 2025, and we are convening this roundtable in person and via Zoom. The time is now 9:46 a.m. We're in the John A. Wilson Building, and I'm calling this oversight roundtable to order. I want to note that we have been joined by my friend and colleague, at-large Councilmember Nita Bonds today. Today, the committee is going to hold an oversight roundtable on building a resilient economy, strategies for the district's growth, investment, and stability. This discussion is essential as the district navigates a shifting economic landscape driven by federal workforce reductions, commercial and real estate instability, and evolving business investment trends. Now more than ever, it is critical that our city's residents, our government, businesses work together to ensure that the district remains a hub for inclusive economic opportunity, growth, and innovation. Last month, the Chief Financial Officer and Inspector General presented the fiscal year 2024 Annual Comprehensive Report. This report determined that the district had its 29th consecutive balanced budget, its 28th consecutive clean audit, and its 10th year with no material weaknesses. It also said that our city's federally and locally mandated reserves equal 52 days of working capital to operate the government and respond to unplanned events. And the ratings for our general obligation bonds and income tax bonds remained very strong. In fact, due to our strong financial management, Moody's rating agency upgraded the district's income tax bonds to AAA. All of this news merely a few weeks ago was a testament to our continued strong financial management of the District of Columbia. However, over the past several weeks, a series of federal actions have had a unique and devastating impact on the District of Columbia. As a result, the Chief Financial Officer's February 2025 revenue forecast projected an average annual revenue decline of $342 million for fiscal years 2026 through 2028, citing decreases in federal workforce employment and real property tax revenues and slowing consumer spending as key factors. The CFO also stressed the heightened uncertainty involved with making a meaningful economic impact analysis, given that some of the new administration's executive actions have or are likely to be challenged in courts. Furthermore, the General Services Administration announced last week the sale of 41 federal buildings within the district. Although the GSA eventually excluded most DC area buildings and removed the list from its website, the agency apparently plans to republish another list in the near future. This raises further concerns about the future of our city's commercial office market and potential broader economic ripple effects. And just last Friday, Moody's placed the District of Columbia's credit rating on review, even though the district's strong financial position has not changed. I repeat, it has not changed since last fall when Moody's upgraded our tax bonds. I want to reiterate that point. The district's financial foundation remains strong, and this review by Moody's is not due to any action taken by District of Columbia officials. And finally, after 2 decades of precedent, the proposed continuing resolution in Congress omits a long-standing provision that typically allows the district to spend at the level set in its congressionally approved budget while Congress works to approve the fiscal year 2025 budget for federal agencies. This would force the district to cut over $1 billion in local spending from its congressionally approved fiscal year 2025 budget and revert back to fiscal year 2024 spending levels. This would radically require the district to identify a full year of savings in just 6 months, potentially upending government services and our city's workforce, threatening our social safety net, diminishing resources to our public schools, and potentially weakening our public safety. Therefore, today's roundtable will bring together key stakeholders to explore solutions that sustain our economy's strongest sectors, support local businesses, and create a roadmap for long-term resilience. Despite all the challenges that I mentioned, the district remains a national hub for entrepreneurship, hospitality, and technology-driven economic growth. Strategic investments and policy decisions made today will shape the future of the district's small businesses, workforce development efforts, and overall economic stability. This roundtable aims to generate solutions that support a resilient and inclusive economy. And I want to hear candid feedback from witnesses today on whether the district's policies and regulations are inhibiting or creating hurdles to doing business in our city. We hope to identify solutions for fostering a more business-friendly climate that would enable the district to compete with neighboring jurisdictions and withstand challenges at the federal level. But to be clear, this council, the mayor, CFO, have been great stewards of our city's revenues. We have a track record to prove it. And every resident of the District of Columbia should expect us to continue to fight for them and to make decisions that are in our city's best interests. So with that, I look forward to hearing from each of our witnesses today, and I want to thank each of you for being with us in person. I think this may be the first time since the pandemic that our entire witness list has joined us in person, so we're excited about that. And although today's roundtable is limited to invited witnesses, the committee invites members of the public to submit written testimony through the council's hearing management system on the council's website at dccouncil.gov. Written testimony will be publicly accessible upon committee review and included in the official record, and the record will close at 5 p.m. on Friday, March 21st, 2025. Before we turn to our first panel of public witnesses, I want to turn to at-large Councilmember Anita Bonds for any opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you to the Assembly. I want to thank you, Chairman, for being very comprehensive in your overview of our local economy. And I want to thank those who are before us today for their willingness to come and talk with us about where we might go moving forward, and certainly advise us of some of the pitfalls that they may see. Our economy is very important to the survival of our city, as you well know, and you all have played a lion's share role in helping us to have the robust economy that we knew a few years ago and are trying to grow back. And so it is important to hear where you are, your thoughts about the current trends. And I think it's also important to know that you are still here with us. I recall a few years ago, the real estate world was saying nothing will be invested in the District of Columbia for a few years. We're moving to other plateaus, as I call it, like Nashville and places like that. Well, some of you decided that you wanted to stay because this is home for you too. And I want you to know that we appreciate that. But this is a very serious discussion today. So we want to hear where the pitfalls are, but we also want to know just how much more can you bend to continue to be a part of this great economy as we're trying to bring it back again. So I want to thank the chairman again for his wisdom of pulling this together. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Bonds. I'm going to call up our first panel of witnesses. Jair Lynch, President and CEO of Jair Lynch Real Estate Partners. Christine Espenshade, Vice Chairman Newmark. Richard Lake, Founding Principal and Managing Partner, Roadside Development. Akash Dakar, Chief Acquisitions Officer at EYA. Thank you. Good morning to each of you. Got Jair Lynch listed first on the witness list, so we'll start with you. Appreciate you all taking the time to join us today.
Good morning, Chairman McDuffie and members of the committee. My name is Jair Lynch, and I'm the President and CEO of Jair Lynch Real Estate Partners, a DC locally based owned investment and development company with decades of experience creating extraordinary places. I'm also here as a member of the Developer Roundtable to express support of housing reform, including the Rental Act, and the need to act swiftly in this time of crisis. Since 2018, the Developer Roundtable has been raising concerns about housing market in the district as our population growth has slowed time and time again over the last 10 years. The layers and layers of regulation have increased increasing the cost of production and preservation of housing, especially affordable housing. It's critical that we stop and think about things holistically, not just project by project, not just groundbreaking by groundbreaking, but the entire housing ecosystem. During COVID, well-intentioned policies like eviction moratoriums and rent forgiveness were put in place to help tenants, but these measures have unintended long-term consequences that have destabilized the rental market and made it harder for housing providers to maintain a strong relationship with renters. Even though 80% of DC's housing stock is considered affordable, subsidized, or rent-controlled, we do not have a clear understanding of how to broaden that marketplace. A coalition of 20 housing providers and nearly 20,000 units have reported nearly $50 million of unpaid rent year after year, a financial burden that makes it impossible to maintain buildings, invest in repairs, and keep units available for those who need them. And when the fundamental contract between tenants and landlord breaks down, the entire system is at risk. If we want a stronger, sustainable housing market at all income levels, we need predictable housing production. Right now, newer buildings make up less than 10% of the building stock. The lack of new construction only drives rents up citywide. At the same time, when rent control is meant to help preserve affordability, it isn't actually targeted to those who need it most, since it's not means tested. Shrinking options for vulnerable and struggling for those at home make it only harder and see displacement happening throughout the region. To solve DC's affordability crisis, we need policies that encourage new housing development while making sure affordability measures actually serve those who need it the most. In 1992, Bill Clinton's made the famous statement, and his strategist made it famous, it's the economy, stupid. In 2025, we should say it's supply, stupid. We really do need more supply in the district in order to be able to maintain a healthy ecosystem. In a recent DCBI and downtown bid analysis, less than 200 units were created last year that were not part of some sort of tax abatement, some sort of affordable housing program. Our fundamental market is not working. These warning signs are very serious. Capital investment for our community and our industry for large-scale investments in our housing production is taking note. Just last year, Urban Land Institute's Emerging Trends in Real Estate ranked DC 49th, dropping from top 10, just in front of Knoxville, not in the class of Houston, Raleigh, and Boston. We support the Rental Act and encourage that the mayor has brought forth, initiate a bold housing omnibus that starts to repair the relationship between tenant and landlord, brings predictability of developing and operating important housing in the district. We stand at an important moment in the city, and these changes are essential to continue growth and critical revitalization. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss.
And thank you for your testimony. Next.
Good morning.
If you could hit the button.
Thank you.
There you go. Thanks.
Good morning, Councilmember McDuffie, Councilmember Bonds, members of the Committee on Business and Economic Development, and staff. I am Christine Espenshade, Vice Chairman of Multifamily Capital Markets at Newmark. Newmark is a global real estate investment firm focused on leasing, debt placement, and investment sales of all commercial real estate classes. I sit in our firm's Washington, D.C. office and lead a team that focuses on the sale of multifamily assets in Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, and Maryland. Personally, I have sold more than $13 billion of multifamily buildings in this region. Per the agenda circulated by the committee, my remarks will focus on capital access as it relates to commercial real estate and the multifamily sector specifically. Along with New York, LA, Chicago, and others, Washington, D.C. is viewed as a gateway market for commercial real estate investors. Historically, these markets offer high liquidity, strong investor demand, and represent well-established real estate markets, thereby attracting the best capital providers. The best capital providers are those with access to extremely large amounts of capital who are willing to accept lower returns because the cities in which they invest are deemed low risk due to a well-educated, strong workforce, access to transportation, and excellent employment and educational opportunities. Investors view commercial real estate in gateway cities as having long-term appreciation potential. However, investors with the lowest cost of capital, such as institutional investors, pension funds, insurance companies, and REITs, now avoid investing in Washington, D.C. multifamily real estate. The asset class is deemed illiquid or not easy to sell due to TOPA. I have spent significant time analyzing two comparable markets to illustrate my points today. Let's agree that Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia share the same attributes: access to great jobs, transportation, and education. They are located one bridge apart, yet investors look at multifamily investments in each jurisdiction very, very differently. Here are some key statistics. And this data reflects multifamily buildings over 50 units, and many of these will have affordable dwelling units or inclusionary zoning in them. Both markets have a similar number of multifamily communities. There are 554 apartment communities in DC compared to 716 in Northern Virginia. It's a 20% difference. Sales in Washington, DC since 2018, 78, 14% of our stock. Sales in Northern Virginia since 2018, 240, 34% of their stock. Since 2018, only 13% of the buyers of multifamily assets in Washington, D.C. were institutional. In Northern Virginia, 37% of buyers were institutional. As a matter of fact, of the 10 sales to institutional investors over the past 6 years in Washington, D.C., only one happened in 2024. It was a 93-unit luxury building in the West End. Why does it matter whether institutional capital wants to buy in D.C.? By its nature, institutional capital looks for steady revenue in exchange for low-risk investments. The biggest institutional investors are insurance companies and pension funds, which need to be able to pay out benefits to their customers as needed. In commercial real estate, they buy high-quality assets with little downside that would be desirable should they need to sell. And because of this, they are willing to accept returns commensurate with their risk, low. Assume 2 comparable apartment buildings are for sale, one in Northern Virginia and one in DC. They are the same vintage, have the same rents, while being equally well located to transit, retail, and jobs. Investors for the building in DC require at least a 100 basis point higher return than if they were acquiring the same building in Virginia. Why? Because investors who buy in DC are opportunistic, not institutional, and require higher returns. What does that mean? That means that a building in DC, compared to one building identical 2 miles away, is worth 22% less than the exact same building over the river. Institutions expect a 4.5% return for an asset in Virginia, while at least a 5.5% return for one in DC. Institutional capital is big. They maintain their properties and can cover maintenance and improvements. These owners don't shy away from buildings with affordable or inclusionary units either. They will not tolerate potentially month or year-long delays in a sale or unreasonable financial demand from tenants when they can place their capital in other jurisdictions. There have been 78 sales of apartments in DC since 2018, totaling $6.1 billion in value. The 240 sales in Virginia totaled $24.2 billion in value, a 75% difference. With DC's transfer tax rate of 2.9%, matching Northern Virginia's sales volume would have generated $523 million more in transfer tax revenue over a 6-year period. Even equalizing for the same number of buildings, therefore having the same denominator, DC could have collected $419 million more in transfer tax in that time frame. Considering modifications to TOPA will increase sales volume and investment in quality housing in Washington. It will bring institutional investment back to the multifamily market, all at no cost to residents as is paid by the owners. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony this morning. Next.
Good morning, Chairman Duffy, Councilmember Bonds, committee members and staff. My name is Richard S. Lake, and I am the managing partner of Roadside Development, a prominent real estate development firm based in Washington, D.C., with a history spanning 25 years. I have previously served as the president of DCBIA, chaired the Developer Roundtable, and co-chaired the Washington, D.C. Economic Partnership alongside 5 deputy mayors. I appreciate the opportunity to engage in this crucial dialogue about the economic aspects of housing in the district and express my support for the passage of the Rental Act of 2025. Over the last 7 years, the district has experienced a decline in its residential market, further aggravated by the pandemic and various regulations that have disrupted the landlord-tenant relationship. These include eviction moratoriums, rent increase freezes, and well-documented misuse of ERAP program and TOPA laws, all contributing to a critical situation in our residential ecosystem and creating friction. Our objective should be to eliminate the frictions hindering production and replace them with predictability. Predictable transactions, modernize TOPA to encourage institutional capital investment in our neighborhoods. predictable rental collections, normalize the district's eviction laws to restore the landlord-tenant relationship, predictable support for affordable housing, predictable entitlements for new developments. Developing a typical multifamily project involves 5 to 7 years of planning, entitlements, permitting, and constructing. Given the current slowdown in housing starts, we face a potential housing supply shortage for several years. That's if we address the issue today. Time is of the essence. Fortunately, many issues within our system are within our control. The Rental Act is a vital first step in revitalizing this system. I also urge the council to refrain from imposing additional regulations for a period of time so we can catch our breath. Washington, D.C. was once among the most attractive global investment markets, but has now become one of the less desirable jurisdictions. To those who argue that our policies are not the cause, I encourage you to observe Virginia's thriving residential ecosystem across the river. The only difference is us, our policies. I'm eager to engage in this discussion and continue our collaborative efforts. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Last witness on this panel.
Good morning, Councilmember McDuffie and Councilmember Bonds. My name is Akash Thakkar. I appear before you as a lifelong district resident, a champion of the city, and a principal of the firm EYA, a DMV-based residential infill real estate developer. I want to thank Councilmember McDuffie and Councilmember Bonds for your leadership as I sit here before you, sitting right next to my partner to my left, Jair Lynch, and we, the four of us, have worked on the McMillan Sand Filtration Site for years and years and years. And I bring that up as an example because I think we all think great work has happened there, but it's happened there 15 years too late, right? And I think, Councilmember McDuffie, you talked about, are there regulations that are in the way? That project should have been built, that affordable housing should have been delivered many moons ago, and we should have been on to the next one. So I'm going to spend some of my time talking about, how we might address some of those challenges. A couple quotes come to mind, never let a good crisis go to waste, and extreme times do call for extreme measures. And I do think this is an extreme time, not only because housing starts have been literally nil for the last 2 years. That predates what we are now facing with the administration at hand and government job losses. So I don't think, and I agree, Councilman McDuffie, with all of you said, the district has been a wonderful steward of its economy for years and years and years, but yet we face an incredible inflection point where we may lose some of the hallmark of our economy, the federal government and the stability that has provided. So first, I want to echo some of what both Richard and Jair said. What could we do now? Or maybe what would we do if we were in your shoes? And I know this may sound extreme, but things to think about. Should we suspend some regulations that in other times might be very helpful? And as many of us lifelong Democrats supportive of many progressive causes, at the same time, if those things are preventing us from building the housing that we need in the city, should there be a suspension? And we've talked about whether it be a suspension of eviction moratoriums, of TOPA, of, dare I say, affordable housing requirements, not forever, but in order to get things moving. Do we look at the PUD process, and should it take 17 years in some cases to get through that? Are there ways to speed that up? Davis-Bacon, that for sure, while it may be noble in its intention, as Jair said on some of these other policies, does that stop projects from happening here, whereas these folks said in Northern Virginia, that isn't the case. So I would ask us to seriously take a look, and I do agree that the Rental Act is a good first step of suspending some of these regulations that are clearly hindering our ability to build housing. Second, and somewhat related, we do need to diversify our economy. I think we are blessed to have the leadership before us here today with Councilman McDuffie, Councilmember Bonds, Mayor Bowser. Many of us know Nina Albert really well. I think she's a wonderful deputy mayor. I think she needs the tools and resources to get out there and diversify this economy. So what do I mean by that? A team of, let's say it, well-paid, highly qualified professionals with a strategy in place that goes out and recruits the best and brightest companies from around the country. And the good news, in my view, is you have these government workers who, sadly, some of them may be losing their jobs, but fundamentally, we've got great human capital in this region. We've got the metro system. We've got great parks, great infrastructure. We need to diversify this economy, and I do think that starts with the deputy mayor and the related entities putting together the best team in the world. And so like when I say think big, best team in the world, and that may cost money and time and energy, best team in the world, putting together a strategy, and then this council and the mayor putting forth incentives. And the three of those things together, I think we're in a great position to recruit and retain the best and brightest private sector companies in the world. And what does that do? That diversifies our economy, makes us less reliant on the federal government. Couple that with really hitting the cover off the ball with regard to supply, as Jair said. And to get to your point, Councilmember McDuffie, that will make this economy that much more resilient and take us into the future. That will keep Councilmember Bonds, all the folks in front of you here, in our hometown where we want to be. Thank you for your time. Thank you for doing this, council member, and look forward to working with you to make this happen.
I want to thank each of the witnesses for their testimony this morning. If you haven't already, I know we have Christine Espensade's testimony. If you haven't, I think, Richard Lake, you sent yours too. But if you haven't had a chance to send it, if you could send it, we definitely want to make sure we have that for the record. I'm going to start off, and if we can do 10-minute rounds, Daniel, with a couple of questions. And I'm trying to begin where to start. We got a lot of good testimony. I like how you all laid out some of the challenges that you're facing in the District of Columbia right now. And I'm trying to think about where to start. I think I want to start with TOPA. I heard concerns about TOPA. I heard concerns about eviction law. I heard concerns about Davis-Bacon, affordable housing requirements. So there's a lot that's going on. I kind of want to level set, though, if we can, because there are going to be some folks inevitably at home glued to the televisions because they love the DC Council hearings. There are some folks out there like that, but they may not understand what's at the heart of some of the challenges that you all articulated in your testimony. And so if we could, let's talk about how we got here, because many of these things that you all are talking about were in place pre-pandemic. I think there are some changes that we made during the pandemic around evictions, moratoria, et cetera, that were specific to the challenges of the pandemic, but yet those policies remained in place thereafter. We made some changes last year by emergency with respect to the Emergency Rental Act Assistance Reform Amendment Act, which was designed to try to address some of the issues associated with affordable housing providers that they face, that were driven in part at least by the ballooning rental arrearages. I want to understand how what we did last year has had an impact, if at all. But I also want, for TOPA, if I'm at home and I have no idea what that stands for, one of you, just break that down for the layperson and what it means for housing today.
More than happy to help you with that. The Tenant Opportunity for Purchase Act is a very important piece of legislation that, at its initiation in 1980, was one of the only tools that the district had to stop any displacement. And at that time, 4-unit, 8-unit buildings were being converted into condominiums and people were being put out in the street. A very important component. It was also a path for homeownership. I think one of the council members actually benefited from the TOPA Act in the 80s. But what's happened is we have not modernized it in a way that has caught up with all the other tools that have happened either locally or nationally, federally, that are here to protect and create affordable housing. 1986, the low-income tax credit has produced more affordable housing in the district and around the nation. It's not a very good, to make it layman, it's not a very good dance partner with TOPA. Federal government created opportunity zones to try to stop redlining in certain neighborhoods. The district invented the Housing Production Trust Fund, one of the most robust funding mechanisms for affordable housing. Not a great dance partner with TOPA. Also invented inclusionary zoning in 2007. All of these tools have been put in place to be able to stop anti-displacement. So the modernization that is being asked for is for the 10% of buildings that have been built in the last 50 years. It's only 10% of our stock. Christine mentioned buildings over 50. If you go all the way down to buildings greater than 5, we have about 3,000 buildings in the district. About 300 of them have been built since 1978. We're talking about modernizing the newer buildings because they're often taken care of, their elevators work, if they're larger and they have institutional capital, they've been taken care of. Those are the buildings that should be exempt from TOPA to be able to make financial decisions, either exiting, refinancing, or those things. Rent will stay the same. As well as and then lastly, we've built a significant amount of affordable housing, committed affordable housing. So the risk of displacement in those cases is gone. The rent will be X day 1, the rent will be X day 2. In those two cases, where modernization needs to happen, those older buildings, those old rent control buildings where there can be displacement and disruption, TOPA still needs to be there and it needs to be strengthened.
Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to put it in maybe more of a context for the consumer to be consumed. So imagine everyone who buys a home is an investor. So imagine you make a decision where you want an investor and build your home. In one side of the street, you have to offer that sale when you want to sell it to everyone in your neighborhood. And there could be a period of time of delay. And the other side of the street, you get to sell your home when you need to sell it. It's the same concept in a much larger scale. Institutional capital needs to be able to be nimble. That's what drives down the returns that they are required. When there's less predictability, when there's less certainty of execution, that creates the friction point that adds to costs. Those costs are all baked in to the pie that the renters have to pay for. So these costs are not just absorbed by other people, they're absorbed by the marketplace. And so therefore, I think it's a time for us to look at how we finance our projects and how we capitalize them, and to make it easier for people to move money into the city and also be able to recycle their money out of the city.
So let me maybe just play devil's advocate for a moment, if I could. I really appreciate the explanation that you all provided around TOPA, the history associated with that. But TOPA has been around since the 1980s.
Yeah.
And there have been a lot of buildings built in the last several years where it seems like, you know, the red flags have been raised perhaps in the last 4 or 5, longer than that. I've heard it longer than that, but I guess it sort of begs the question, what was the inflection point where investors started to say, Houston, we have a problem, we're gonna bypass the district in terms of the projects? Because I mean, the district has seen a lot of development.
I think it's a cumulative issue. The marketplace, we were utilizing extraordinarily small interest rates, and we were able to overwrite basically overwrite those issues, those concerns. But today, it's too much of a lift.
Well, I think the other thing that to really look at is, again, these institutions have billions and billions of dollars to invest. They essentially have come in and out of the district in a one and done situation. They came in, they capitalized a building, they went to sell it. It took 12 months, 16 months, 2 years. During that time, especially some volatile interest rate movements, hundreds of millions of dollars were lost by these people. And let me be clear, no one is crying for these big banks and, oh my gosh, they lost their money. Okay, fine, they can absorb it. But at the end of the day, they're not coming back. They're not coming back and saying, I'm going to offer a low cost of capital to Jair and other developers. I have conversations with these investors every single day who I'm like, oh, I have this deal in DC. And they're like, give me a break. Call me when you have something in Virginia. DC has so much to offer. There's no reason we can't be as competitive. And I think Jair said this, very, very well. Every one of us here believes that affordable housing is actually what makes cities great. We need to have great places for people to live of all levels. Teachers, firefighters, bus drivers, they have to have a clean, safe place to live, but you have to have capital coming in order to support that part of our business. So the inflection point was institutions came in, they got burned, and they are leaving in droves. And this is all going to be public information of huge pension funds who are selling at millions of dollars of losses, REITs who are doing the same. Attracting that back is really, really difficult. So that is why I think a modernization of TOPA, it's something to be considered as part of an overall way to enhance the economy locally.
And Akash?
Just to add, you asked Councilmember, why did DC have such a strong run? I think what has happened is many other urban municipalities have caught up. So when you heard Councilmember Bonds talk about a Nashville or places like Tampa, forgetting about New York and Boston and those kinds of things, we were a place that was urbanizing, and I think we were on the early edge of that trend of people moving back into cities, using metro, life within walking distance, et cetera. Now that's the norm. So when these folks are looking at where they can invest, 15 years ago, Nashville wasn't an option. Sacramento wasn't an option. Now those places are options. So when they're looking pound for pound, it'll take 12 to 16 months to sell a building that I'm investing in Washington, D.C. It'll take 3 in Nashville. It's an easy decision for them, unfortunately for us. The second thing I'd like to talk about, even for the folks at home, is supply of housing, because oftentimes it is thought that when folks like us build more housing, what that's doing is actually pushing the cost of housing up. I like to use the example of like this iPhone in my hand. An iPhone costs $1,000, maybe less, but it runs our lives. Why does it cost so little in comparison to the value it drives? Because there's an unlimited supply. There's no cap on supply. And to the extent that the district can, like I said, hit the cover off the ball on supply of both market rate and affordable housing, clearly that will push price down, but there's got to be enough scale to make that happen. So just wanted to add those points.
All right, I'm gonna turn to Councilmember Bonds now, but maybe dig a little more deeply into some of the recommendations that you are making, just so we have a more fulsome record around that. I really appreciate how you laid it out in your testimony, but I want to kind of dig into it a little bit more in my next round. Councilmember Bonds?
Thank you very, very much, and thank you all for your opening comments. I guess where I am is wanting to understand what you think we must do in order to level the playing field so that we are equals with Northern Virginia and other parts of the country. And I'm asking you to not hold back. We might as well put it on the record what you think from your perspective. And I know you have a very charitable heart. So don't tell us things that you know will just crush our residents, but tell us things that you really think that we can do. Because we know that TOPA needs adjustments. And I appreciate you pointing out it's about 300 buildings that could benefit from some modification. But then how do we repair I think, estimated 2,000 buildings that are there that are, some are under rent control, some may be, small co-ops. How do we do that? Because we don't want to lose any of our housing stock, number one. And at the same time, we want to continue to have the opportunity to build.
One of the things that we have to make lots of great choices at home, what are we going to have for dinner? What are we going to do when we go to the grocery store? We all have to make choices. Right now, eggs aren't going to be on the menu every single day, but we do have eggs in our diet. I think we're going to have to make similar choices about some of the components of sustainability, some of the components of protecting the environment. We're not going to let go of them. We should not abandon them. But I'm going to give you a real live example at the Reservoir District. We have a new regulation that's supposed to protect birds. We have to increase the rent by $20 in order to protect, for every single person in a building, in order to buy bird-resistant windows. It's over $1 million increase for those windows. And that means everyone's rent went up $20. Is that the choice we need to make? Or do we need to have solar on the roof Or do we need to have something else? There's ways to be sustainable. There's also ways to go a little too far. And in every situation, you can't do it all. And we don't give that opportunity at the building level, whether it's new construction. Only imagine what that looks like in a 4-unit co-op, where the residents are trying to pull together their own dollars in order to be able to fix up their building. It doesn't happen. And so we have to create some flexibility there. Pauses in regulation, exemptions, other things I think are important without losing the overall intent of creating a sustainable city that has supply, that works.
I appreciate hearing that, Mr. Lake. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very important time for us to sit back and think about, and we have some tools and we have some opportunity. The two gentlemen down the table from me are building a project that they designed 17 years ago. And today they wouldn't build what was designed because it's not current with it, but they can't, there's inflexibility in the process. So I think we have to take a hard look at what are our priorities. And the number one issue I see is friction and cost. And friction means cost. So if it takes you 7 years to do a PUD, you'll build a project without a PUD and leave density off the table forever. What's that purpose? Who's that serving? We're reducing our supply naturally, even when the marketplace was strong. It costs too much to build in the district because of our regulations. There's nothing different about our brick, our mortar, our exterior finishes, or even our interior finishes. And we have to drive more rents to justify those costs. And the reason is because we have regulatory issues. I relocated 3 trees at City Ridge at $1 million. Those were the oldest trees on the site. 2 of the 3 died. And we spent $1 million. So we have to look at what is our priority. We also planted over 300 extra trees. So we have to think about what we're spending our money on, because there's a relationship between cost and rent. The consumer always picks up that cost. And so while we make our decisions, so I would look at the comp plan coming up. There's a real opportunity for us to significantly change the way we entitle properties in the city and get projects moving quickly. And that is by baking in more development rights in the zoning, and take away some of the regulatory and make it more administrative approval. That's just one. I'll let other people speak.
I'd like to echo, thank you, Richard, echo some of what Richard said. So let's say, how do we get housing moving? You asked for recommendations. TOPA reform, PUD or similar entitlement reform, making it easier to build, not without requirements. So for example, it's now essentially a requirement that you've got to build 15% affordable housing with a PUD. It's essentially a requirement that you have great design. Make that part of the process. You're building, we're going through this comp plan right now, and there are sites that myself and everyone up here are going to come towards you with saying we want more density, and I'm going to use Richard's project at City Ridge. Richard, did you have to do affordable housing for that project?
We did IZ, but we did it as a matter of right.
Right.
We left probably about 500,000 square feet of density off the table because it would have taken us 15 years to go through the process.
So in that perfect case, give Richard that density, make him do the affordable housing that's reasonable for that project, give Office of Planning Design review, because we all want great buildings, but don't make it a process that is appealable for, in McMillan's case, 17 years. So we're not opposing the idea of what are our key priorities. And as Jair said, we might not be able to do all of them, but we all think affordable housing is critical and important. Keep that on the table. Make the process much quicker and make sure that we're not leaving density on the table, because we just left not just market rate housing on the table, but affordable housing on the table because of the way the entitlement process works. So TOPA reform, PUD reform, and then I'll throw something out on the table that is not a permanent measure, but what about something like a 50% tax abatement on any new multifamily that starts? So assuming, again, you're going to have your inclusionary zoning, so it's new housing, but what I'm suggesting is if you don't do that, then that housing may not be built, and if it is going to be built, it might be years from now. So it's not a loss of tax revenue. It is 50% abatement off any new housing for the next couple of years to get the cycle rolling again, and then we go back to normal. That shouldn't be a permanent state. I point back to the way I bought my first condominium in the district. Mayor Williams put forth a blanket tax abatement in NOMA. You guys, I'm sure, remember this. If you build residential, period, full stop, nice and easy, not a bunch of regulations, and tons of new housing was built. And what is surprising to me is that market, even today, because there's so much housing down there by Cap One in Chinatown, the rents are lower than you might expect in a good way because there's just a lot of housing because it was very easy to do for so long. So there are measures like that where in some ways we're back in 2003, 2004, we've got to rebuild, and those types of, I might call them extraordinary, but needed measures should be adopted.
And I would like to just add on the TOPA front, and you provided this opening, right? Currently, it's, TOPA's, and what's in the Rental Act will qualify for a smaller number of buildings. So what do we do about the older stock, the rent-controlled buildings, the smaller buildings? I would actually say it's something to look at as what Prince George's County has done. So Prince George's County has a right of first refusal for any multifamily building that is put on the market and is scheduled to sell, whereby 27 approved mission-based housing providers have the opportunity to match the offer put on the table, right? One of the challenges with TOPA is that the tenants go in, that contract can be shopped to anybody, and that's the time delay there. And those are often vulture type people who come in and are actually going to do not anything in the favor of the tenant. So if the district would consider going through a process, selecting qualified people who could participate in that ROFR/TOPA process, would ultimately help the tenants preserve affordability, invest capital in the buildings. I think that is the way to continue to have buildings trade while preserving and improving the housing stock. Because I think that's one of the challenges too. All of a sudden you get absentee landlords, buildings go down in quality, they go down in value, and that's what nobody wants for their neighborhoods.
Thank you all for terrific round. My time is up, so I'll have to wait and we'll talk more. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. Ms. Espenshade, you actually are going down a path that I want to continue, because my question was going to be, looking at these various laws and regulations that you all mentioned are creating challenges. What specifically do we need to do to change them? And to be clear, this is not a hearing on the Rental Act, but a lot of what's in the Rental Act, it sounds like, was designed to address some of the things you're talking about. So I want to acknowledge that and lift that up. On the other hand, I'd love to hear more about which of these policies or laws are in place in the district but don't exist anywhere else in the region, right? Or if there is some version of one of these policies or laws, where in the region is actually doing it better? I think the example you just provided for Prince George's County was on point. But when I hear TOPA, I hear PUD issues, I hear eviction law issues, I hear Davis-Bacon, I hear, challenges with affordable housing. I'm interested to really hone in on which of these sort of makes us the hole in the donut. Which of these are policies that investors are running from? TOPA, we talked about. Is there some version of TOPA? You mentioned Prince George's County. Does it exist anywhere else? Is what's in the Rental Act going to do it for us, or do we need to go farther in some form or fashion? Sort of broad question, but please, if you all could just
So I'll just
jump in.
address the
Yeah.
TOPA issue. There's no other jurisdiction in the United States that has a law as onerous as TOPA. Multiple jurisdictions do have rights of first refusal, Montgomery County and Prince George's County locally being those jurisdictions. Montgomery County has bigger issues. So people know the process there, but the process there is very short. And it's one where, again, approved mission-based owners can come in and compete versus the open market, right? And that's the challenge with TOPA. And other jurisdictions have tried this. Boston in particular was going through a process whereby they wanted to introduce that. It was very much shot down by the real estate community, coming back and citing the DC challenges and actually having institutional capital come in and say, you do this, we will not build in Boston. So I think from our perspective, that's the biggest one. And you guys can talk more about
Yeah.
ERAP and such.
Well, I think if you're looking for a couple of different modifications from the act, I believe the definition of consideration should be looked at. If we make definition of consideration only investment in the buildings, Now we're improving our stock and we're improving our overall climate of our marketplace, as opposed to an opportunity for people to use this as a way to get in the way of a transaction and get bad actors. I also think we have to look at what drives up our costs, because it really is about cost of returns. So if we look at Davis-Bacon for our public property, that adds about 15% to the costs, construction costs of a project. First Source adds costs, especially the latest law of First Source drives up costs significantly, because it's not 51% of all the new hires, it's all the new hires. So now you're getting a smaller pool of subcontractors who can bid on these. It costs more money to dump dirt out of a DC site than it does a Montgomery County site. Couple reasons. One, the driver has to have a special license to operate in DC. Number two, DC has a regulation that any brownfield site, those dumps cannot be dumped at a DC site, has to be hauled off site into another state. We have limited work hours that drive up costs and production. We should be looking at.
Limited work hours?
Yeah, we have limited work hours. So in other jurisdictions, it's much easier for us to be able to get work hours on the weekends. We have additional holidays. We have the 7 to 7 rule, but basically, if you look at it, all job sites pretty much close down around 4, especially if you're bringing in concrete because of the rush hour traffic. So we need to be looking at easier ways to build, because the same unit is costing probably in the neighborhood of 20% more to be produced in Washington, D.C. than it is in Northern Virginia. And Chris just talked about how Northern Virginia is getting more value for their units. Where would you invest? If it costs less to build and I get more value and I can get access to my capital faster, where would you invest? And I can't charge someone 20% more rent in DC than Northern Virginia, because they're also, as Ashraf said, they've already caught up to us. They figured out this urban quality of life, this mixed use, this walkability. Arlington, you could argue, has really figured it out. So I don't think Tyson's quite has, but anyways. But the point is, that's our competitor. We're competing for dollars. The three of us that invest in projects, we're your biggest cheerleader. We're out there trying to raise money because we're roughly 10% of the equity in these projects. We have to raise 90% of this equity, and that equity can go anywhere. And they're not as loyal to the marketplace as we are.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a combination of things here, because I earlier asked about TOPA and why all of a sudden is it an issue since it's been around since the 1980s. Sounds like it's a combination of things. Even though some of these laws are sort of legacy laws that have been on the books for decades, there was an environment where District of Columbia was an attractive place to invest, notwithstanding some of the challenging regulatory environment that exists. But other jurisdictions around us have caught up. They've become more attractive. The competition is frankly stiffer. And it sounds like it makes more economic sense to look at those other places and bypass the District of Columbia. Is that accurate?
You're absolutely right. I put one comma behind it.
Okay.
We were the darlings of urbanism in 2005, 2006, 2007. Coming out of the Great Recession, we were the leader in terms of population growth. Remember the days where we talked about 1,000 people were moving to DC every month?
All the cranes that we're counting?
But the cranes came a year or two afterwards because the population was so strong.
Why though? Why were we the darlings of urbanism, and why was the population growing the way it was?
For a couple reasons. One, we still had parking lots all through downtown. We still had riots, ravaged corridors of 8th Street and 14th Street. We had metro lines that were built in 1999 that just were taking shape. The Green Line, for instance, that now is one of the more popular lines. All of those things came in place. We were investing in the city with Shakespeare Theater, with baseball, with all kinds of things. And we started getting population. We are not winning on population, right? That's the first step. We're not winning on population growth. We're not winning on job growth as we were 10, 15 years ago. So we did get some early investors who said, look, DC is really moving. They're urbanizing. They're doing something great. We had so little production. 5% of our total stock was built between 1978 and 2007. 5%. And then it moved.
Mhm.
And it moved around all the things you mentioned, plus jobs, plus population, and then they got burned.
Well, and
And when
also,
they got burned, they're not back.
you could tie it directly to the ease of rent control in the
Yeah.
next boom. And then it got slowed down
Say
because
say that again, just make sure.
of the ease of the rent control, the reduction, removing the rent control of all new buildings. That was the kickstart of a bigger boom of residential development. And then we had the Great Recession, which slowed down. But that was the real impediment. People weren't investing in here because they weren't going to build a new project that was going to be subject to rent control. So policies really have a direct relationship to our boom and bust. If you look at our policies, and so I would say that it's a cumulative policy also making. It's this regulation, getting rid of gas, getting rid of this, getting rid of other things, charging people to park downtown. Anything you do that creates friction, removing a lane traffic on Connecticut Avenue rush hour, making it harder to move around in the city. And all of those things are adding to our woes. And I would argue that they're all things that are in our control to modify. We can't change interest rates. We're not going to change the investment strategy or the time strategy of an investor from a closed-end fund. We're not going to change those things. But we can change how we can allow that money to come in and come out of our marketplace. And these are around the edges, in my opinion, that can really have a significant movement. I've already received calls from 4 different investors when the Rental Act was announced that the city is now taking this seriously.
Yeah.
And now we're interested in talking to you again.
No, I appreciate that. And as I mentioned earlier, this isn't a hearing on the Rental Act, but the bill has been introduced. It has been referred and essentially it's in 3 committees. The Committee on Housing has the whole bill, and then the Committee on Human Services has a component of it, and Committee on the Whole. And so my colleagues, Robert White, Matt Fruman, and Chairman Mendelson, I imagine will be taking this up, given how high the stakes are and the implications of some of the things that are mentioned there. Not saying that everybody supports it. I don't know where they stand, frankly, but it deserves a hearing and a conversation because of the things that you all have articulated and how it potentially could have the impact to help us turn the corner on some of the things that you all mentioned in your testimony. I'm over my time. I'm going to turn to Councilmember Bonds, see if she has another round.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for your testimony this morning. I was thinking as you were explaining initially some of the examples of things that we could soften or change that would have impact to help our economy grow again. And particularly, you focused on affordable housing and really housing in general, because if we're going to increase population, we'll probably need that. So I wanted to the issue of TOPA, I think, has been a longstanding issue. And we haven't really moved the dial on it. We understand that. But also, when we think about IZ, one of those additional programs that we implemented to sort of put brakes on displacement, 8-10% is not enough affordable housing. So how do we get to 20%? That begins to change the trajectory for our city. It also begins to put some meaning to a tax abatement, a limited tax abatement. Right now, what we have is if you say you're going to build some affordable units or bake them into your project, we have this thing called project voucher amount that you get. But then, once it's built, we end up with tenants that have a voucher. So it's almost like double dipping. And we can't afford that any longer, as you well know. It just doesn't work. So how do we really deal with this project voucher amount? I think you're onto something when you say, let's talk about limited tax abatement, limited time frame, and a limited amount. So can you tell me if that makes sense? Because I'm thinking if you want to build a 100-unit building and you're going to have 20% affordability baked into it, how do we get to that so that we produce more affordable units as well as we now have this multiple income, location?
I think the reality is affordable housing is a public will issue. We all believe in it. Are we willing to spend on it? And it's a collective we. When you're adding regulations and risk, right now we're trading density for affordable housing. And unfortunately, our land values have dropped for all the reasons we've talked about. So the ability to trade density for more affordable housing, those days are gone. What is a more clear trade will be how much does it cost and how much can you abate in taxes? That's a much clearer, and we applaud the council for creating two programs that are ready to go and have applicants, barring this TOPA issue and this investment climate issue. Both HANTA and HID have tax abatements that derives a significant amount of affordability. I know Akash has an example of a project where he has the land, has the affordability, has HANTA, doesn't have an investor. Doesn't have an investor because of TOPA and because of delinquency that's happening. So we need to get the big rocks out of the way, and then we need to have a more sensible, clear trade for affordable housing through tax abatements that allows multiple players to utilize and deliver that affordable housing. A REIT, a nonprofit, for-profit, a bank, anyone can use a tax abatement. Not everyone can use Housing Production Trust Fund. Not everyone can use low-income tax credits.
I think it's also about operation costs, because right now, it's not just about putting a unit into service. IZ units on a whole do not cover their operating costs. So you're now subsidizing that unit for indefinitely. So to give you some example, and some of it is our tax policy. So we built the building, 30% affordable, it was a DC property. The purchase price was adjusted because of the 30% affordability. The city charged us as if, because it was below 70% of the assessed value, charged us at closing their own property at full assessed value. That costs hundreds of thousands of dollars of additional costs. Then our real estate taxes come, and the assessor won't even look at our covenant that requires 30% affordable forever to take into consideration of how they're taxing that building. That building is getting taxed more than its neighbors because it's a new building and has nice units, but ignores the fact that 24 of the 74 units are actually affordable. So if we're serious about this, and I think this is the point, if we really have the will to deliver and support housing and affordability at all levels, we need to start looking at our policies and think about how we make that more available to the marketplace.
Additional comment on IZ, two things. As you may know, Montgomery County was one of the pioneers of inclusionary zoning. What we developers like about that program, 15%, 12.5 to 15% is the norm there. As soon as you deliver, if not before, they have a list pages long of folks that will rent the apartments at the stated rents. And it's really important for us because in the district, it's a newer program. We don't always have that. What does that mean? Those units may sit fallow. Two issues. One, maybe most important, they're not going to the people who need them and they're sitting there vacant. Second, we need that cash flow, even if it is reduced, in order to pay our mortgage, just like we would for our home for that building. So a robust infrastructure to support IZ one. And then two, IZ rents are not at HUD rents. And so HUD is sort of the national arbiter of rents at 60%, 80%, what have you, of AMI. And that seems to be a fix that could be made very quickly, but we do need to keep rents up with where they should be while keeping them affordable. So those two fixes would really help IZ moving forward. I'm going to just talk about something else that both of you have asked about. What places do things better than we do? So we do a lot of business in Montgomery County and Fairfax County. In Montgomery County, you can do out-of-turn comp plan amendments. And so we do our comprehensive plan every 7 years or so, and that doesn't take into account where the market is. And so I'll give you a perfect example. Providence Hospital, a project that we are working on to redevelop. The community there, and we support this community, wants a small amount of retail, right? Pursuant to the comp plan as current, we just cannot do that. It'll be good for the project. It'll help us get investors. Most important, the community saying something small, coffee shop, place to get a haircut. That's what that community needs right off 12th Street. We can't do it because the comp plan doesn't allow it. And there isn't a way to change that comp plan until you guys adopt that 2 to 3 years from now. We'd like to be in the ground in 2 or 3 years. So in Montgomery County and Fairfax County, you can go to the council and say, we'd like an out-of-turn comp plan amendment for these reasons. We have community support. Maybe we don't, but the council wants it for housing or other reasons, and we can move that forward quickly. That is something that we should consider to allow you, the council and the executive, to make decisions on what is ultimately the land that you will tax, to make decisions and allow that flexibility that Richard talked about to address market conditions and do we need to do to address housing.
Thank you very much for that. Can we talk a little bit about the PUD and how it is not moving in the direction that we needed to?
Yeah, I think they have too many scars to talk about it maybe. So I think the challenge is the following, and I said this to the chairman Mendelson one time. I said, we all believe in democracy. So let's like the process. The developer goes to the community of the ANC, which is duly elected body, gets their support for a project, works with the community through design and so forth, takes the property through the zoning, the planning office, and then gets a set down and goes to the zoning. Also, people who are appointed by duly elected members of the community. They approve a project. Then 2 or 3 people who are maybe in the neighborhood or maybe not, or maybe related, or can interrupt that transaction and put it into, and basically can go out and halt hundreds of millions of dollars of investment for extended periods of time. And those have costs. They have costs to, if you bought the land, they have costs to the landowner, they have costs of loss of taxes to the city, it has loss of employment. It is a multitude of costs because 2 or 3 people who were not part of the duly elected bodies have decided to oppose something. And that is just unheard of. That's a process that doesn't exist. I had a property in Northern Virginia we were doing, and some law firm didn't want a particular grocery store, was hired by a grocery store to keep them out of it, found a constituent to file a lawsuit. Virginia said no. It went through its duly process. It went through its process. We were under construction in 3 months, not years. There's a senior housing project that just wanted a BZA approval and got a BZA approval. It's 5 years ago. It's not even, there's no shovel in the ground. They've abandoned the project. We lost 200 beds for seniors in an area that we needed because of what? And so I think we have to take a step back and say, if we say to the developers, you have a community to work with, the ANC, that should be the body that speaks for the community. Then you have a zoning office, you have the professionals who decide that's appropriate for the location. That should be seen as done, But that's not how the DC behaves. And that is a significant problem for the development community.
Just to put some color, and Richard's correct, both Akash and myself have several scars because of McMillan. We are back in for another zoning modification that is subject to appeal and could be appealed because we're on our third grocer. And just a reminder, community benefit package, several $1,000,000, dwarfed by the legal bills for all these bills. That money could have stayed in the community.
I appreciate that. We could talk more, but my time is up and Chairman will probably continue this discussion.
No,
Thanks.
I appreciate that, Councilmember Bonds, and I think Councilmember Bonds and I both have scars directly related to McMillan. In fact, I know there are a lot of residents in the neighborhoods around McMillan, Stronghold, Bloomingdale, down in Truxton Circle, who are also impacted by the years of delays associated with that project. So I appreciate your insights there. A lot more things we could talk about today. I want to get to the next panel. I'm sure we will have some follow-up based on the testimony you all provided, and really look forward to working towards some of the solutions, perhaps some of the ones that are not contained in the Rental Act, that would better help our economy. So thank you for your insights and your testimony today. Moving on to our next panel, if we could have Courtney Battle, Executive Director, Housing Association and Nonprofit Developers, Boer Benitier, Founding CEO, Dumas Collective, Liz DeBarros, CEO, District of Columbia Building Industry Association, and Alex Baca, DC Policy Director, Greater Washington. Good morning to each of you. I want to thank you for joining us here. Really eager to hear your testimony. We're going to start in the order that you all have been listed on the witness list with Courtney Battle.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here, Councilmember McDuffie and Councilmember Bonds. My name is Courtney Battle, and I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Association of Nonprofit Developers, or HAND for short. HAND is a nonprofit membership association working across the private, public, and social sectors to collaborate in the production and preservation of affordable housing in the capital region of the district, Maryland, as far as Baltimore, and Richmond. As the district faces economic headwinds at multiple levels, affordable housing must be at the center of our plan to sustain our economic growth. The ability to create stable communities, attract and retain talent, and foster innovation is inextricably linked to the availability of affordable housing. Regions that fail to address housing affordability challenges risk economic stagnation, a shrinking workforce, and increasing inequality, all of which hinder long-term growth and prosperity. However, as I testify before you today, the affordable housing industry in the district faces a foreclosure crisis. This crisis is massive and affects the entire affordable housing industry in the district. It puts at risk the ability of our low-income tenants to live and thrive here, and it's unique to the district and caused largely by district policy. According to DHCD, approximately 22,000 government-subsidized units of affordable housing representing 48,000 residents are currently at risk of foreclosure. HAND has heard from multiple mission-driven affordable housing providers, both nonprofit and for-profit, who tell us that to avoid foreclosure, they will have to substantially reduce their footprint in the district or even exit the district market entirely, as you've heard from my fellow witnesses today. The foreclosure crisis is putting tenants' existing committed affordable housing at risk. If an affordable housing provider cannot sustainably maintain a certain relatively low level of non-payment, typically no more than 5%, they cannot pay the mortgage on a property. If they fail to pay the mortgage, they risk foreclosure. Crucially, the foreclosure of an affordable property will almost always result in the end of the legal requirement to keep units affordable. Even for buildings that manage to stay afloat, the crisis is making it harder to maintain and improve buildings as providers are forced to spend the cash flow that would otherwise be earmarked to maintain and improve buildings on paying the debt caused by high rates of arrears. Finally, this crisis is making it even harder for those seeking an affordable home to find one. Although the district has long been a leader in the region in producing housing and specifically affordable housing, production is dropping off while demand continues to rise. The affordable housing pipeline is at a standstill while dedicated funding in the Housing Production Trust Fund this year has understandably gone entirely to stabilizing struggling affordable properties. The result is that competition for affordable housing will only continue to intensify to the detriment of the district, its residents, and its economy. I've heard claims that this crisis exists simply because rent is too high in the region. I agree that rent is too high and that we should continue to develop new and innovative ways to strengthen the district's social safety net and help residents pay their rent. However, the crisis occurring in the district is unique and distinct from that in other high rent jurisdictions. Last fall, the Council's Committee on Housing held a hearing on ERAP reform, and at that hearing, multiple HAND members testified about a crucial statistic that they were seeing in their portfolios, the disproportionate amount of arrears in the district. For example, Wynn Companies, a large national manager of affordable properties headquartered in the very high rent city of Boston, testified that the district comprises only 2% of their total unit count, but represents 28% of their unpaid rent. This highly disproportionate rate of rental arrearages in the district points to the issue being with local district policy, not merely the high cost of rent. There are multiple factors causing this foreclosure crisis, but the primary culprit is the district's broken court system, which is operating on massive delays compounded by the pandemic, capacity issues, case volume, and timeline difficulties. Currently, the first available date for a bench trial is over 8 months away, and even routine motion hearings take 2 or more months to schedule. This creates a process that can take between 12 to 16 months to complete, up from between 3 to 5 months pre-pandemic. The council must act to improve procedures in landlord-tenant court. This includes allowing for more judicial discretion, closing loopholes, improving timelines, making notice requirements less cumbersome, and generally bringing the district's policy in line with neighboring jurisdictions. A faster process helps all parties, and the longer the process is drawn out, the more arrears rack up and the less likely it will be that a tenant and housing provider can find resolution through settlement. The council's emergency legislation last fall amending ERAP was a good first step, but further work is necessary. The Rental Act, recently introduced by the mayor, includes critical changes to the court system that will address this problem. I urge the council to hold a hearing on this bill as soon as possible so that we can have a functional court system and bring much needed investment back to the district's affordable housing pipeline. The broken court system is one of the primary reasons the district is struggling to attract investment in the residential market. Lenders who finance affordable housing projects using funding sources like the low-income housing tax credit, above all, seek to minimize their risk. In the affordable housing space, that does not mean sky-high profits, but rather the knowledge that an affordable provider will receive most of the committed lower rents that are expected from a given project. The court's failure to enforce leases efficiently has given lenders the impression that the district's affordable housing providers cannot effectively manage their buildings, and it makes investing in a property an even bigger gamble. This causes lenders to opt out of DC, choosing instead to invest in other parts of the Mid-Atlantic region or the rest of the country. It is for the reason that the district, once one of the best places to build and invest in affordable housing, is now viewed as one of the worst. Although the courts are probably the most urgent problem facing the affordable housing industry today, they are not the only problem that must be addressed to improve the district's affordable housing supply. The district must also prioritize financial relief through the budget to ensure providers can remain operational and maintain existing affordable housing while the housing ecosystem rebalances. We should strive for innovative ways to use the district's limited resources efficiently, including expanding existing tax abatements and allowing public funding to be leveraged with private funding to increase provider liquidity and let district money go further. Ensuring consistent funding for new production and preservation projects is also imperative. As providers face increasingly high arrears and demand continues to outpace supply, affordable housing must be the council's top legislative and budgetary priority. HAND's goal is simple: to support our members in the production, preservation, and protection of affordable housing, and we are always happy to support the district in this shared mission as well. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
And thank you for your testimony. Really appreciate it. Next.
Good morning, Chairman McDuffie, and other esteemed council members. Commend you all for taking the leadership in looking at ways on how we can improve business environment here in the District of Columbia. My name is Bua Benitia, and I'm the founder and CEO of Dumas Collective, a Black-owned Washington, D.C. based firm dedicated to creating and preserving affordable housing in our city. My companies have proudly served the district for nearly 20 years. Over the years, my companies have been at the forefront of providing affordable housing solutions here in Washington, D.C. We've partnered with the city on many projects to ensure our most vulnerable residents have access to quality, affordable homes. To date, DHCD has invested more than $300 million into Dante's Partners development projects, translating into $1 billion of total development costs. Through these projects, we've helped create generational wealth, stable communities, and sustainable development. However, our efforts over the last 2 decades and the district's direct investment stand to be undone as a result of self-imposed laws enacted since the pandemic. We now face unprecedented challenges which threaten not just our businesses, but our employees' livelihoods, our tenants' quality of life, and the stability of our communities. The most challenging pandemic policies are first and foremost those affecting the eviction landscape. This includes the 30-day notice requirements, the over $600 non-payment evictions, and the dubious ways tenants have exploited and continue to exploit the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which have made it nearly impossible to remove bad actors from properties. As DCHFA, our finance agency, recently reported at the most recent oversight hearing, the agency has observed the following. Properties on their watch list have risen from 5 properties in 2019 to now 47. Delinquency rates have gone from 5% to 30%. Operating expenses have increased 20%, and my own company's delinquency rates in 2025 alone is now $3 million. This time last year, it was $700,000. The main reason for number 1, 2, and 4 is the abuse of ERAP. It is simply a waste of our tax dollars. Why would anyone invest knowing they would only collect 60% of their income? To put this plainly, how would you like to receive 60% of your salary? How would that bode for your ability to pay your own mortgage and your living expenses? Similarly, landlords withheld rent at this scale make it difficult to cover mortgages, pay property taxes, and maintain our costs. Other recently enacted laws that make it almost impossible to do business in the district are the First Source program, which despite its noble intentions has placed significant administrative burdens on employers. The math is not mathing. With a population of 687,000 residents and 69% old enough to work, that leaves 474,000 people eligible to work in the district. However, DC has a 4.9% unemployment rate, which means only 21,000 people right now are available to work in the district. Unfortunately, there are not enough trained construction workers in the district to fill these jobs. In 2022, of the 15,000 construction workers in the DMV, the district represented only 9%. That's 1,300 people, compared to 65% that are Maryland residents and 24% that are Virginia residents. So assuming we start building on 2 major projects in the district, say Capital One or RFK, how are developers such as myself going to be able to pull DC residents to satisfy the First Source program? The council also enacted policy that appeared to prioritize trees and pets over people in this most recent council. For example, recent amendments to the DC tree preservation laws and enhanced regulations around pet accommodations have placed additional financial and logistical pressures on developers, making it harder to finance projects that produce much needed affordable housing. In 2022, this same council enacted the Clean Energy Building Code Amendment Act of 2020, basically requiring that new buildings achieve a net zero status. How? Additionally, the Building Energy Performance Standards, also known as BEPS, which accomplishes nothing but confusion for those interested in doing business in the district, was also enacted. These self-imposed laws signals one thing and one thing only: the district is not open for business. In closing, I urge the committee to reevaluate these policies and work collaboratively with us to create a balanced regulatory environment that fosters growth rather than stifling it. Without thoughtful intervention, the district risks losing investments, talent, and opportunity. We must ensure that the district that I started my company in 20 years ago continues to be the darling of investments. Thank you for your time and consideration.
And thank you for your testimony. Next, Liz DeBarros.
Good morning, Councilmember McDuffie, Councilmember Bonds, and staff and the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I am Liz DeBarros, CEO of DCBIA. I want to address the critical challenges facing our real estate development industry, which you've heard a lot today, and offer solutions for a stronger, more vibrant DC. We commend the city's focus on downtown development, with office vacancy rates soaring. The Office to Anything and the Housing in Downtown programs are vital. These initiatives can transform empty spaces into residential and mixed-use areas, bringing much-needed foot traffic and supporting our businesses. However, we face significant economic headwinds, rising costs, ERAP delays, and new regulatory requirements like the Migratory Local Wildlife Law are pushing developers out of DC. We recently saw a positive step with the council's quick action on the FY25 BSA residential reclassification for office to residential, moving the timeline to building permits to the building permit phase. We are grateful for the collaboration with DEMPED, OCFO, and we need to build on that momentum and create a permanent fix to address other regulatory burdens. The current zoning appeals process is a major impediment. We're working with DEMPED and the Office of Planning to streamline approvals, reduce frivolous claims, and align our zoning laws with neighboring jurisdictions. We had a productive meeting last week with OP and are eager to continue the work to see immediate improvements. On the DCBIA fully supports the Rental Act and its 11 sections, and I'd like to just note that the first, there's 9 pieces in the Rental Act that are immediate fixes for the affordable housing issues that have been raised today. And there are 2 pieces that will help with capital investment, TOPA, and the ERAP. So I think it's important to focus us on, given that there's been so many topics that we've talked about, and they're all real and important, but the immediate thing in front of us is the Rental Act. And as you see, Chairman, you see how this is an economic development issue, housing. So having this hearing right now is a very timely and very important. So we fully support the TOPA provision in the Rental Act, as well as the Rental Act as a whole. The current system primarily benefits older, smaller buildings, not large scale or new housing projects. Financing has changed since TOPA's creation 40 years ago. Frequent refinancing is now common, creating unnecessary delays. This deters investment and pushes developers into other jurisdictions, and forcing them to some to close. Modernizing TOPA will streamline sales, increase revenue, and attract capital back to DC, protecting residents while growing the tax base. To achieve our shared goals, I'll say in closing, of affordable housing and economic growth, we need a comprehensive review of the regulatory framework. This includes expanding eligibility for abatement programs, reducing regulatory burdens, updating zoning procedures, and we need to create a development-friendly climate. We appreciate the collaborative efforts of this committee. DCBI is committed to providing informed recommendations and working with the council and other associations as well to drive sustainable economic growth. We need a proactive approach now more than ever, and we certainly appreciate your leadership on opening this hearing to talk about economic development. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Final witness on this panel is Alex Baca. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Alex Baca, and I am speaking today on behalf of Greater Washington, where I serve as DC Policy Director. We appreciate the opportunity to contribute our thoughts on how to build a resilient economy in the district. The Committee on Business and Economic Development is the closest thing that the DC Council has right now to a Finance and Revenue Committee, and we hope this roundtable portends similar conversations and forums going forward. GGWASH advocates for more homes, more affordable homes, fewer trips by car, more public transit, and fairer land use policies. We feel that future growth, investment, and sustainability is most likely to flourish in the district if its leadership leans into its essential cityness, which does sometimes require removing lanes from cars. The district's best feature is the people who live in it, who are the most reliable contributors to its coffers. Though the contours of the district's economy are being redefined as we speak, the benefits derived from agglomeration, which is nothing more complicated than people locating near one another and is something that DC can boast more of than its surrounding jurisdictions, are likely to withstand headwinds that are outside of our control. GGWASH's focus is typically on medium to long-term policies, and what I'll be talking about today are indeed mostly suggestions that exceed the scope and timing of the FY26 budget, such as legalizing more housing and shifting to more progressive, more efficient taxes. Nonetheless, the FY26 budget can be used to lay the groundwork for those policies, and we look forward to working with the committee to do so. I'll start with the comprehensive plan rewrite, which for those of you who know me, know is a big deal for me personally. I've been working on the comp plan since the amendments were opened, and I'm super excited to see that OP is undertaking the rewrite process. The current comp plan, which again was written in 2006 and amended in 2021, is an unwieldy document that often contradicts itself and does not allow for enough housing to be built by right in the district. GGWASH would like the rewrite of the comp plan to primarily increase allowable density throughout the entire district, particularly in the parts of it where land values are highest. This is one of a number of our comp plan rewrite related asks, the full list of which I know the committee has already seen in our oversight testimony on DEMPED last month. But it's the most critical one. There is a housing shortage in the district that is harming the economic well-being of and limiting the choices of our current residents at a time when middle-class taxpayers are our most stable source of revenue. Further, high housing costs may disincentivize people from moving here. The district is a great place to live, and there are plenty of reasons beyond federal jobs for people to be here. Housing costs within reach, close to transit and amenities is something that even other American cities can't offer, not even Nashville. Regardless of what is going on with the federal government, the district is still an attractive place to live. A recession here is not going to dampen demand to the extent that DC is suddenly perceived as having cheap, plentiful housing and will bring with it additional harms. Conversely, we do not feel that it is appropriate to conceptualize resident rights and protections, such as the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act and rent stabilization policies, as stymieing housing production when the path to producing housing here is anything but smooth. Even if the comp plan, current or future, allows for high or medium density residential construction, zoning may not, and the Zoning Commission has mired itself in process, often stretching its cases into years-long slogs for applications and witnesses. The comprehensive plan rewrite is the opportunity to legalize more housing district-wide by right. It is not a quick fix, but it is the appropriate venue for big picture conversations about housing production, which is popular among district residents. Recent polling that we conducted alongside the Greater Capital Area Association of Realtors and the DC Association of Realtors found that 63% of district residents say it's more important to lower housing costs by loosening certain land use regulations and zoning rules to increase housing development. This holds across wards. We have a lot of excellent information in that poll. It's linked in my testimony. I don't need to go into it further. That said, there's still much to do to make real the 2021 amendments to the 2006 comprehensive plan. While the Office of Planning has been working its way through the implementation of those amendments, largely by submitting map amendments to rezone 1617 U Street Northwest and the Chevy Chase Civic Core, the Zoning Commission has indulged too greatly specious opposition to proposals that are not inconsistent with the comp plan and serve a clear public benefit. The Commission's protocols deserve more scrutiny, as the drawing out of approvals for discretionary developments, including planned unit developments, has created a climate in which it is more attractive to means test tenants' rights than it is to substantively address what we allow to be built, where, and with whose input. The next grand bargain that we strike for our development paradigm should not trade tenants' rights for housing production. Not every site will be the best fit for a multifamily building, and the district is quickly running out of neighborhood-sized vacant parcels like Navy Yard and Walter Reed, on which it has historically built substantial amounts of new housing. Few office buildings are good candidates to convert into residential, and conversions mean that former commercial properties are taxed at our lower residential rates. And most significantly, we can't control interest rates, and we can't control construction costs. Tax abatements are the default response to rising costs, but they are a poor budgeting practice. It is not wise to borrow from our future selves, especially with a recession looming. We need to find an alternative to abatements, especially the decades-long ones. In addition to legalizing more housing and making the entitlements process more efficient, GG Watch would welcome the opportunity to better understand what financing the district itself could provide, perhaps through low-interest loans from a revolving fund to get market rate projects to break ground. If lenders are skeptical of district policies, perhaps it is time for the district to invest in what we know to be lucrative, which is development. My testimony includes some commentary on tax and revenue policies that I think have moved slightly outside of the scope of this right now. So I'll leave those as written, and I'm happy to follow up on that later. But in conclusion, I value consistency and predictability within my work and personal life nearly above all else. I suspect that those doing business in the district feel the same. District residents, too, deserve to be treated as worthy of policies that would incentivize growth, resident and investment, and sustainability. Our programs and services, such as paid family leave and universal pre-K, are drivers of economic development, and the tax increases that funded them did not result in capital flight by residents. The district's longstanding economic development covenant of a golden goose downtown and high commercial property tax rates to shield homeowners from increased residential taxes is fading. More housing, not fewer rights, should undergird what comes next. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I want to thank each of the witnesses for their testimony this morning. It's always a challenge trying to figure out where to start when we get the testimony that's been provided. I think a place to start, though, is because some of you have touched on it in your testimony, but there are some things that the council has sought to do in the form of emergency legislation, like the Emergency Rental Assistance Reform Emergency Amendment Act last year, which was designed to try to address some of the challenges with non-payment of rent and some of our COVID ERAP policies. I guess I'd like to start with a general question that any of you can answer, but what, if anything, has changed since we passed that legislation last year?
Absolutely nothing.
Okay. All right, now, you know, you got to expound on that. I got to get more.
I'm happy to. So a couple of things to note is, first and foremost, it was a bold step to hear the community out, to want to do something. However, the emergency legislation was further diluted. And the dilution basically meant everything remained status quo. So if you create an environment where any tenant, without demonstrating any need whatsoever, can apply for ERAP, guess what's going to happen? Everybody's going to apply for ERAP. And what we were trying to communicate to your colleagues at the time is, if anyone in the country has to apply for unemployment insurance, which I have done back in the day, I had to demonstrate need. I demonstrated need by providing either a resignation letter or a termination letter. In the District of Columbia today, anyone, any renter can go before Department of Human Services and say, I cannot pay my rent. And what ends up happening is every single tenant is applying at the same time, and every single landlord is also proceeding with court cases with every single tenant at the same time. So prior to even getting a court date to address a delinquent tenant, right now we're seeing court cases that are being scheduled for October and November of this year. So you ultimately end up having a tenant who's going to reside in the building for 12 months because they have a pending, not an approved. So you don't demonstrate need, and you only have a pending application. So those two things combined has created a cycle, a vicious cycle, of individuals that have taken advantage of the system.
If I may.
Yes, please.
Would also, because I know that there's also been discussion on how DC is measuring up to what other jurisdictions are doing. And so I wanted to just also lift up an example of what we call bell hearings here in DC. And so, for example, when a defendant claims that I'm not going to pay rent because there's something wrong in my apartment, DC precedent requires that a judge holds a hearing to determine whether that problem warrants the tenant paying a reduced amount of rent into escrow. However, in between, and that's called the Bell hearing, in between the initial hearing and the Bell hearing, there's no rent paid. So that could be, 4 months or how, quite a bit of time that goes by without that tenant paying rent, which results in a loophole, and simply asking for this type of hearing provides that defendant with this delay. In Maryland or Virginia, on the other hand, you'd have to pay that rent on a monthly basis for the duration of the case into escrow. So the lease, for example, in that case, the least that we could do is just require rent to be paid until we determine whether or not that amount should be reduced. So just wanted to highlight that as well.
I appreciate the example, and the rental act that has been introduced by the mayor and referred to the relevant committees and the council does make permanent the provisions of the emergency bill last year with some tweaks. If anybody wants to speak specifically to which areas you see being improved if that bill were to pass.
Absolutely. So demonstration of need has to be pivotal. Otherwise, nothing changes. And an approved application is going to be necessary, which would basically reinstate the contract between the landlord and the tenant. Because right now, if you have the way the legislation reads, and it still reads this way, it says if you have a pending application, the judge may stay your case. It has to be approved application, not pending. So to put things in context, right now, in full monetary context, we've wasted a total of $120 million of district tax dollars, and I'll tell you why and how we got there. So last year, DHCD put out $80 million to help sustain landlords for non-payment of rent. DC Finance Agency put out another $10 million for landlords due to unpaid rent. The monies that you all set aside for ERAP in last year's budget, also for unpaid rent, amounted in total to $120 million of wasted money. That's money that should have gone towards production, and it's going towards stabilizing the economy. And that's 1 year alone. And given where we're going in 2025, we're going to see twice the number of subsidies that are going to be needed to stabilize this asset. And if you don't believe me, I believe last week or this week, a 435 unit property just went into foreclosure because of this very same issue. And that property is called Meadow Green Courts.
And do you have a sense of how much of that property is it mixed use or is it?
It's 100% affordable.
100% affordable.
It's 100% affordable property that can no longer sustain its mortgage simply because of this issue.
Does anybody on the panel do business in other places? And can you highlight ways that the District of Columbia is different? And frankly, if we're different in good ways, I want to hear that too. But I certainly want to hear ways that the District of Columbia differs from other jurisdictions, whether or not they're in the region, that negatively impacts your ability to do business.
Sure. I don't know if anyone else does business outside of the district besides myself. I do business outside of the district and other jurisdictions. We're very, very fortunate that we've been able to accomplish quite a bit in New York City, and we're making major inroads in Florida, which is very interesting given that it's, and obviously Maryland and Virginia. So I'll talk with the good and I'll go to the bad. The Housing Production Trust Fund is unprecedented. In my travels across the United States, I don't know of any other jurisdiction, bar none, besides New York City, that devotes significant amount of monies towards the production and preservation of affordable housing. I would say New York and Washington, D.C. are neck to neck, which is staggering given the size of the population, the huge difference in population between those two cities. I would say, bar none, the district is up there. So that's a major, major plus. Another major plus is, I mean, given the, and my colleague spoke about this earlier, given the urbanism of how much DC has developed, this is a place to be for professionals, for families. You all rallied together last year to address crime, which is huge, and I think we've all seen that difference now in the district. You all have rallied together to do some amazing things, no different than what you all did yesterday by rallying together because we're about to see a 12% cut in our budget. Those are all good things, and that's why we're here today to ask you all to rally for the fact that we are seeing 30 to 40% cuts in revenue. As far as the bad is concerned, I would tell you this. Mathematically speaking, I have almost eclipsed the number of units that I've done in New York City as I've done in the District of Columbia. And the reason for that is because in other jurisdictions, and I'm pointing specifically to New York, the amount of red tape, which is staggering. I did not think that would be the case. The amount of red tapes that we have here in the District of Columbia is stifling. My rent collections right now in New York City is pretty much damn near close to or lower than where we were pre-pandemic levels. And the only reason for that is because for whatever reason in the District of Columbia, we have chosen to keep the rental assistance program going longer than it's needed to be. It's the only reason from a rent collection standpoint. And we talked about zoning laws. Look, the governor of Florida just basically made zoning law a state mandate, meaning all of the multiple municipalities no longer have the authority to dictate what zoning a building has to undergo. The governor basically put a law in place that says you can build to the next highest building within a mile radius of your site. That's your new zoning regulation. On top of that, they also invested $700 million towards the production of affordable housing because they understand that there isn't a workforce in place to be able to address the influx of people that are moving into Florida in droves. They eliminated all the zoning red tape, and they also invested or injected tons of monies, which is why it makes sense for companies like mine to go help build the affordable housing that they sorely need over there.
I'm over my time for this round, so I want to turn to Councilmember Bonds for a round. Thank you.
And thank you very much to the panel. And boy, I hear you loud and clear. You're there in the field and having to live with it every day. And I appreciate hearing your stories and particularly what you think needs to be done. I really appreciate that. I also wanted to hear from the other members of the panel, particularly since I think we kind of zeroed in on the Rental Act. And then I want to hear what you think about the advent of changing our comprehensive plan. And Ms. Baca has made it very clear that that's where her attention is. So I'm very curious about that because, you know, a comprehensive plan is rules and regulations. And we're in a society now where rules and regulations are not always followed. So I'm very curious about that and how that really speaks to where we really are today and how do we move forward over the next 3, 4, 5 years. So we'll start with, let's talk about the Rental Act, because I know that's first and foremost.
Sure, Council Member, great to be with you this morning. So in terms of the Rental Act, we see lots of great items in that legislation that would benefit our members. Of course, reforms to the courts, as I mentioned in my testimony, which we see as a very urgent priority to resolve some of the issues that we're seeing. We know it's not the only fix, but a very important piece that will close loopholes and also just make processes more efficient. Beyond the courts, we also know that other pieces such as making the local rent supplement program work for struggling projects, improvements to the emergency rental assistance program, and repositioning of vacant properties. So we know there's a lot in that legislation, but we are optimistic that there will be value for our members. And so I'm looking forward to the opportunity for a hearing on that legislation.
All right, and when you speak of repositioning vacant property, what does that mean? How are you looking at that?
Sure. So if you allow me to, if you could more specific, is, if you could clarify what you mean by that question.
Well, we always speak of these terms that are in legislation, as chunks of information processes that we must follow. So when you think about what was pointed out through the Rental Act, that we have vacancies, how do you see us addressing the vacancies that we do have? We actually have seen a rise in vacancies over the last year or so.
Sure. So I, am happy to, respond offline, with my testimony, and my colleague, Director of Public Policy, is here with me as well. So happy to provide some additional insight there. But as I mentioned, I think that it's not a silver bullet to these issues. Jair mentioned on our earlier panel that supply is a large part of what we're seeing. And so we see not only the production of new housing, but preservation as very important. And so I think that addressing the vacancy issue will be critical to our supply challenges, and happy to provide a more detailed response to after the hearing as well.
I appreciate that. But when we talk about vacancies, we're talking about units that are across the board in different buildings. We're also talking about a situation where if there is a vacancy and it's been vacant for 5 years, then there is a increase in rent, a percentage that's higher than what would be particularly with rent control units. And we're talking a lot about those units that fall into the rent control inventory. So I'm just wondering if you've given some thought as to, if we're talking about vacancies, how do we address that? And then there's the depreciation value, and some landlords choose to leave a unit vacant because the depreciation is better than having a poor renter, poor meaning poor in paying their rent in the property. And so I just wondered if Han had looked at all of that. I know that Mr. Beniti has looked at it on a regular basis. So just curious.
Yeah, I mean, the issue around vacancies is, frankly, in the District of Columbia, a vacant property is worth more than an occupied.
Thank you.
That's just
Yeah.
putting it plainly.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry?
Yeah, I appreciate the honesty.
Yeah,
Yes,
a vacant building is worth way more than an occupied building, because if a building is vacant, I don't have to go through TOPA.
Okay.
That's putting it, I mean, the red tapes is just, again, makes it very difficult to be able to, and the issue around, and people talk about, not feeling sorry for investors or banks, so on and so forth. The bottom line is, you speak of depreciation, buildings require recycled capital such that they're able to maintain their longevity for many more moons, right? So we acquired a property that has reached its useful life. And I have to go bring in new capital to reinvest in that property such that I don't have DOB knocking on my door. And if I don't recycle, if I can't bring in new fresh capital to reinvest in this property, then DOB is going to knock on my door. Then I'm going to get all the harassment notices for being a delinquent landlord. So the recycling of capital is essential to keeping the building's health moving forward.
So I guess I'm wondering if within the Rental Act, or some other piece of legislation, do we really need to address that issue? Because we have people in the District of Columbia who would love to have a unit to rent. And so how do we get people in these units and create a kumbaya so that everyone's happy? We have people in the units are in a, good, safe, state of affairs, they do not need repairs. And at the same time that you're seeing as a landlord or provider, you're getting the rent paid.
Absolutely. Listen, I think the Rental Act is the first. There are certain things within the Rental Act that are very easy and quickly to address. Elimination of the 30-day notice is a big one. The $600 threshold is a big one. And providing some level of predictability in the court systems and the eradication of ERAP are also big ones. There is no incentive for me right now to go lease a unit if I feel like I'm just going to perpetrate the same vicious cycle that I'm experiencing with all the units within my building. So that's how you address vacancy. Like right now, I have zero incentive to go have a unit be occupied because there's a strong possibility. There's a 60% chance that the tenant may not pay rent, another 70% chance that I can't get to the courts, and another 80% chance that I've got to go through this red tape in order to evict the tenant. So why sort of buy more headaches, so to speak?
I see.
Yeah.
Now you're on. Okay.
Now I'm on. Thank you. You mentioned the comp plan. I just want to add that DCBI is going to be very active in the comp plan as we have before with the rewrite. We typically get the entire industry galvanized around it, between zoning attorneys and developers and engineers and architects. We sort of look at it from a very practical reality, making sure that we align with what the city's goals are. And so as we're looking into the comp plan, and I think this discussion today, addressing the emergency issues that we have in front of us in the crisis, planning for 2050 is going to be very important.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Baca, you want to add about the comp plan? You mentioned it in your testimony.
In the remaining 10 seconds, I will just say that the comp plan rewrite, really important. It is a longer term solution, but I think a lot of the things that we're talking about today can't be fully addressed without it. So unfortunately, all of this is in lockstep. But also, the planned unit development process is really, really, really bad. You'll hear me go to bat for TOPA, but I will not go to bat for the way that we handle discretionary development in the district. The zoning commission has drawn cases out for far too long. And I think it is worth some of, especially, maybe our genius land use attorneys, and I say that sincerely, might have some good ideas about how to make more things by right, even under the current comp plan, which I think is really important.
Well, thanks for your addition.
And if I can just add as well, the comprehensive plan is also very critical in ensuring that we have housing across all 8 wards, as Mayor Bowser has prioritized over the course of her administration, and making sure that we're not displacing residents and lifting up more equitable housing opportunities, not concentrating in one area of the district.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the panel.
Thanks, Councilmember Bonds. I didn't quite catch the last part of your response, Alex Baca, and would love to hear it again on the record, and then I have some follow-up.
Sure. I had just brought up that the zoning commission has, I think, really struggled to efficiently address the cases in front of it. I have paid particular attention to the implementation of the comp plan amendments. So the future land use map was changed to increase allowable density.
Right.
As you know, I brought up 1617U and Chevy Chase in my testimony because those are public sites. So they are district owned. The district obviously has its own housing target. Those are not, they should be fairly uncomplicated, right? And the zoning commission has sort of gotten itself mired in process and has extended hearings, it has added hearings, and that's for district-owned land, right? Which
Right.
should have ostensibly like slightly fewer complications around financing and fewer ideological tussles, as the case may be, as to what their outcomes are. There is, as far as I can tell, I am not a lawyer, but my understanding is that these are the map amendments that OP has proposed are not inconsistent with the comp plan. I don't think we have a good process within OP, within DEMPED, within Office of Zoning, and within the Zoning Commission to expedite amendments, map or text amendments that are not inconsistent with the comp plan.
Can I ask then, for anybody on the panel, with directing it to you, what does a good process look like?
Great question. I don't know that I would look to Montgomery County or Arlington, to be honest. I don't think that they offer that much more. I think they're being talked about somewhat glowingly in comparison to DC, but land use entitlement wise, I wouldn't say that they have that much to offer. So we may be sort of on our own, right? My goal is to get as much housing as possible to be built by right throughout the district. We have some tools within that range. I think IZ Plus has been really interesting to sort of see how that's applied to mitigate the concentration of income restricted subsidized housing in communities that are already overburdened. We have some good stuff. We have good policymakers in the district government. So I think we're kind of on our own in both visioning and determining what works well. And I think there is a broader sort of question around what does it take to make zoning consistent with the comp plan. The way that I would like to see that happen is just OP devote a little bit more time to it and see if there's anything within the existing zoning code that can be amended to expedite things that are clearly not inconsistent with the comp plan. And that just probably takes some legal review. Whether or not OP has the appetite for that is a different story.
Seems like whenever it starts to require additional legal review, it just sort of mires the process in additional process.
I hear that
Length
totally.
of time and inevitably the cost associated with doing business and doing development in the District of Columbia.
What I meant with legal review was that probably someone with a law degree, so like not me.
Oh, got it.
Needs to take a look at what the existing zoning code might allow in order to reduce some of that entitlements process. And that is an exercise that Office of Planning could undertake. It does depend on their appetite for that. Someone independent of OP could do that as well if they were.
I know you want to say something, Mr. Benitier, but let me throw one more question really quickly at Alex Baca, because the last panel, Akash Thakkar recommended that the council consider and mandate out-of-term comp plan amendments as allowed in Montgomery County and Fairfax County. I wanted to get your thoughts on that. I don't know that it's easy for us to be able to do that given the limitations of the council's authority around zoning, but I wanted to throw that out there.
So we already kind of do that with small area plans. Every time the council adopts a small area plan, that's basically adopting a out of rewrite amendment to the comp plan. So we have some models for how to do that. There is some language in the implementation section of how to amend the comp plan when the full thing is not being rewritten. It's not perfect, but I would say that we don't work exactly the same as Montgomery County from the jump, actually. So it's not the worst comparison, it's not the best comparison. We do have the capacity to do that.
Let me ask, because I'm not as familiar with Montgomery County or Fairfax County, but the out-of-term comp plan amendments, does that process there take as long as a small area plan takes in the district?
I mean, the small area plan takes time to do. The adoption of it, you all have adopted small area plans pretty quickly. So if it's prepared, and I can't speak for Montgomery Planning and how long they take to prepare their out of order amendments, it may take them 18 months. Their planning department, just like our planning department is. So.
Got it. You, Mr.
Yeah,
Benitez?
so, look, as someone who's participated in several planned unit development projects in the District of Columbia, I would say, look, the zoning commission has been a fairly good arbiter in helping to put in place policies and procedures around what and how we build our buildings in a particular community, particularly because some of these buildings are going to look different than what's there right now. However, two key areas is the subjectivity has to be eliminated. We need to basically go back to the four corners of what it is that the zoning commission and office of planning and frankly, the ANCs need to be focused on. Where we get and what, listen, we just got out of a 10-year battle with the community on the Bruce Monroe site because of subjectivity. The ability for someone to be able to challenge a site for 10 years is just nonsensical. So I think that we need to do whatever we can to basically stick with an objective process by which the players know how to conduct themselves on the playground. And right now, that isn't in place.
I appreciate that. I want to turn to Liz DeBarros, because you had mentioned in your testimony that developers face challenges in the district, such as the requirements, the new requirements around migratory local wildlife law. I think separately, the committee has heard about how greener building and net zero requirements can quickly increase costs. We've heard it from folks on this panel, prior panels, from folks who've reached out to the committee on projects that are currently in the queue or under development. And I wanted to give you really just an opportunity to expound on what DCBI members are facing and whether there are some specific solutions to addressing some of the challenges around the newer laws.
It's a great question. Thanks very much for the opportunity. The migratory bird local wildlife law, it came into place not too long ago during shortly after the pandemic. And those new requirements actually cost a lot. The regulations are not written yet, but the law's in place as of January. So it's a surprise cost to developers, especially in this sort of very difficult economic environment. So when you look at that, it's something that I have heard over the last year as something that has come up that's very difficult for making deals, pencil out as they're planning in the future, knowing that this is on the books.
Mr. Benicio, you can turn your mic on, but just while you're doing that, and perhaps you have some experience or have colleagues who have experience with it. One example I heard about was additional cost of approximately $1 million for specific windows in the development.
It's at least that, and some buildings more.
Yeah, so the type of fenestration that you would have to incorporate into a building is cost prohibitive for the project to be able to move forward. That's basically what it's lead to. You have to go find a different type of window that most buildings don't need to have.
And then, I mean, just talk about the impact when like new laws, new regs come into place, given sort of the life cycle of a development deal, how long sometimes it takes to put these things together, when you get financing, and how, in some instances, new laws, regulations could impact those costs and really make it difficult for developments to pencil out or to come to fruition.
Yeah, so we could even, for a company like ours, right? We can directly tell you how First Source adds additional cost to the project because one, we cannot find enough workers. There aren't. I don't want to say we cannot find. There aren't enough workers to be able to satisfy First Source. So in some cases, we just opt to pay the fine. So that's additional cost right there. The wildlife law that we're talking about right now is a different type of window. It's a different kind of threshold. It's a different kind of threshold that has to be met. So that's additional cost right there to a project. The laws that were enacted around trees, we're looking at a project, right? Just like Richard said, right? Just like Richard mentioned, he's building new trees on the site. However, he's got to relocate heritage trees, which I have a likelihood of dying. And the relocation of an heritage tree, I don't know if any one of you have ever relocated one, that is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So already I have 3 laws that are on the books, 2 new, 1 old, that cost exorbitant amount of monies to projects in an exorbitant interest rate environment like we're in right now. There is no way any one of these projects can absorb these new costs, which is why some of these projects just end up remaining stale.
So, and I'm recognizing I'm over my time, and I'm going to turn to Councilmember Barnes for another round, but I just want to follow up because my understanding is that there are other jurisdictions in Maryland and Virginia that have similar bird-friendly laws. Is it that our law is stricter in some way and more costly to a project, or is it sort of the cumulative effect of multiple laws of this nature that make it more expensive in the District of Columbia, or
It's
both?
the cumulative effect.
Could I just also add, we recommended that the law follows the migratory patterns of birds, not, like it applies to all buildings. So I think that the nature of that, there's no sort of way, you're not really addressing the issue if there's no birds flying in a particular place.
Right.
But that was something that didn't, make it through the end. But I think more discussion on this is necessary, given the cumulative issues that we have, plus the emergency situations with affordable housing.
And that's a good point that Elizabeth just made, because you end up creating laws that almost suggest that every single building can meet the law. So this whole idea around net zero, there are going to be some buildings that can't meet it, right? If the building is skinny in nature, there's not going to be enough square footage on the roof to be able to install solar panels to be able to achieve net zero, right? If I want to basically create an alternative means of generating power into my building, I've got to go geothermal. The cost of going geothermal is exorbitantly cost prohibitive.
So, and now I'm not going to ask you to respond to this, but I was having a conversation yesterday. I do not recall with whom, but it was about our net zero law and whether it should have been more akin to a net zero ready law as opposed to, I think, sort of more of an absolute requirement that adds the cost that you all are talking about. And I haven't looked into it enough at this point to make the distinction between what they were suggesting about perhaps our law simply being that buildings should be net zero ready. But I wanted to just throw that out there.
Yeah, no, it's all new buildings by 2027 have to start meeting. I'll tell you in a second because I had it in my appendix, forgive me, because I found it to be very interesting. Yeah, so we talked about the Trees Preservation Act, we talked about the pets and deposits. And the net zero law basically says that by 2027, all new buildings have to meet net zero standards.
Got it.
So it's an absolute, and it doesn't make any accommodations for the type of building that is being built and whatever other geographical limitations that may exist that would make it almost impossible to be able to meet those net zero
Got it.
standards.
Councilmember Bonds, appreciate your patience. Thanks.
No problem. I had questions about the Wildlife, Act and the solar and net zero as well. So thank you for adding that to the record. I wanted to talk a little bit about First Source because that is a law that we would like to have applied to new construction, even to renovations, but okay, we'll go with the new constructions. My concern is, I think we heard on the first panel that the issue is, if you do the math, we do not have the opportunity to find those in the District of Columbia that could become workers in these different trades that would be needed for construction in particular. And I'm wondering, what are you finding, Liz, as an example from your members?
Okay.
Yes.
Sure.
all
So,
right.
I mean, look, this is something that I'm living with right now. So we had a first source law that says 51% of new hires. That's what the law had originally. And for whatever reason, it basically says that every single trade within the 16 divisions that exist on construction have to meet first source. So what does that mean? It means I've got to go find someone that is knowledgeable about installing elevators. I've got to go find someone that's knowledgeable about building a concrete slab in the District of Columbia. I've got to go find someone that's knowledgeable around electricity. I've got to go find someone that's knowledgeable. So in the construction project, we have 16 trades. And in each and every one of those trades, I have to find a district resident that is knowledgeable and proficient in each and every one of those categories. It simply doesn't exist. And if it does, it's called a unicorn. That's what the law has on the books today. So there is no way any project, whether it's RFK that's potentially coming, or Capital One, or any other major project in the District of Columbia, can ever meet those standards. So all the district is doing is basically prepared to find each and every one of those projects.
All right. And would you sort of state for the record what happens when you cannot meet that as a contractor?
In the event which most of these projects will not be able to meet, will end up paying a fine to DOES.
I see. You're on, Liz.
Thank you. I just added that it goes back to housing supply. We want to have a robust, environment where people can come and live in DC and have affordable housing. And if a requirement in DC requires a construction project to have a DC resident on the job, we want to have as many DC residents living here and available for those jobs.
Do you see the interpretation of the law being modified so that it's clear that again, back to new hires, that a contractor may do to be 51% of new hires, and it can be collectively as opposed to, let's say, it requires 300, big number of construction workers. And we're talking now 51% of any new hires. Of the 300, maybe 30 are new hires.
I think we
Is
should
that reasonable, or is that?
I think we should open the discussion and have that, especially at this time.
Yeah, the world was fine and happy and rosy when it was 51% of new hires. There was no issues. I don't think anyone had any issues meeting those requirements. Right now, it's impossible to meet.
Thank you. That was my burning concern. Courtney, you want to add anything? Alex? All right. Okay, thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Councilmember Barnes. Appreciate it. I want to thank each of you for your testimony and your time today, and I'm certain that there'll be follow-up with the committee as we move forward. So thank you. I want to turn to our third and final panel for today's roundtable. We can have Marisa Flowers, Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President of Strategy for the Greater Washington Partnership. Chinetti Hubbard, President and CEO of DC Chamber of Commerce. Aisha Bond, President and CEO of Greater Washington DC Black Chamber of Commerce. Dr. Tracy Haddon Lowe, Fellow, Brookings Institution Metro. And we're now in the afternoon, so I really appreciate your patience. I saw some of you as I walked into the hearing room this morning, so I know you've been here for a while, and look forward to hearing your testimony. We're going to start from my right and your left with Marisa Flowers.
So just updated my testimony to say good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chairman McDuffie, Councilmember Bonds, members of the Committee on Business and Economic Development. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's roundtable discussion. My name is Marisa Flowers, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer with the Greater Washington Partnership. And I appreciate the chance to share thoughts on building economic resilience for the district's future. While I know a lot of the conversation in this morning was focused on real estate development and the critical component of economic development that it serves, I would like to focus my comments today on workforce and the broader business community. I'll share a few points just to ground my testimony. As we all know, the District of Columbia faces significant economic headwinds. The district's economic growth continues to lag behind national averages. Recent growth as of the end of 2024 was 1.8% as compared to a national average of 2.7%. Despite post-COVID recovery efforts, today DC has approximately 26,000 fewer jobs than pre-pandemic. Again, this is as of December 2024. Concerning employment gap, the DC economy remains, as we all know, heavily dependent on the federal government employment, with nearly 1 in 4 workers in the district directly tied to federal employment, again, as of December 2024. The projected reductions in the federal workforce and federally occupied commercial real estate will create cascading effects throughout our local economy. Just as one other note, the district received almost $34 billion in federal R&D funding in FY22. About $2.2 billion of that was directed to businesses, higher education institutions, and nonprofits. Potential reductions in this funding stream similarly support employment across a wide range of job types, impacting not only research institutions, but the businesses that either rely on or service those institutions. So to build a more resilient and vibrant economy for the district, I'd like to propose a few initiatives for your committee's consideration. The first is economic diversification through supporting emerging industries. Accelerating efforts to diversify beyond federal dependency by strategically identifying and supporting growth industries where we have competitive advantages based upon the district's and the region's unique assets. We need to be data-driven in that asset mapping and broad in the approach to leveraging industries throughout the region. Number 2, talent retention and development. Consider creating pathways to retain skilled workers who may be displaced from federal positions. There are existing opportunities within some targeted sectors. Providing support for federal workers to quickly match their existing skills with private sector opportunities will be key to helping to stabilize households within our region and our underlying tax base. In addition, creating accelerated pathways for individuals to gain new in-demand skills through additional education, as well as identifying skills adjacency, are 2 areas, again, for consideration. Third is business and entrepreneurship support. A thriving small business ecosystem can absorb economic shocks and create new opportunities. Ideas for consideration could include reducing barriers to new business formation, targeted incentives, and other investments to support scaling up and retaining businesses. Commercial real estate transformation. As the federal office footprint shrinks, creative approaches to repurposing those commercial spaces. Obviously, there are some things underway with office to anything, as well as office to residential conversions, but thinking more broadly about the opportunity to create new mixed-use districts and vibrant economic and employment centers. So to provide sort of a broad implementation framework for some of those suggestions, we might suggest one, that any approach really needs to be a coordinated approach, that it is first data-driven, making targeted investments where they will have the maximum input given limited resources. Two, cross-sector collaboration between government, business, educational institutions, and community organizations. Third, regional coordination with neighboring jurisdictions to develop complementary rather than competitive strategies. As we all know, on a practical level, many people here live, work, play, are educated in a regional fashion, and the impact is regional. And finally, regular measurement and evaluation to adjust approaches based on those outcomes. So in conclusion, by diversifying our economic base, supporting our workforce through these transitions, fostering entrepreneurship, and reimagining our built environment, we can build a resilient economy that benefits all district residents. I welcome the opportunity to work with the council and other stakeholders as we explore these and other strategies. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you for your testimony this afternoon. Next.
Good afternoon, Chairman McDuffie, Councilmember Bonds, committee members, and staff. My name is Chinyere Hubbard, and I am the new president and CEO of the DC Chamber of Commerce. I'm honored for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the member companies of the DC Chamber. Today, the district is undoubtedly faced with fiscal challenges that could have an impact on district residents and add uncertainty to the stability of our city's businesses. They include emerging congressional efforts to prevent the district government from spending its own locally raised funds to fulfill existing budget commitments, as varied and vital as public education, public safety, human services, and mass transit. Congressional threats to replace home rule with a federal government takeover to add to the challenges confronting the district, as does the potential devastating federal cuts in DC Medicaid funding. The CFO Glenn Lee's most recent revenue estimates have been revised downward by $342 million over the 4-year financial plan. The DC Chamber of Commerce stands firmly with our members, our partner business organizations, with you, council members, Mayor Bowser, and local public officials to advocate that Congress step back from a series of abrupt and highly unusual initiatives that, if enacted, would hurt our residents, particularly our most vulnerable residents, undermine our economic growth, and make the district less safe. These risks are both immediate and profound, and we must do all we can in short order to prevent them from materializing. We have before us, though, an opportunity to take on these challenges and enact pro-growth measures that will energize and help our local businesses continue to thrive. The most immediate opportunity will come with the passage of the FY 2026 budget. Early next month, Mayor Bowser is scheduled to present the executive budget proposal to the council. We are facing a moment in which our policymakers should thoroughly rethink a business as usual approach to our budgetary and growth priorities. We should continue to focus our combined public and private sector efforts to reinvigorate our downtown and surrounding neighborhoods. Specifically, we must continue to support the increase in existing abatements for downtown conversions, reasonable exemptions of first source and TOPA requirements, and additional investments to support the decision to keep our Wizards and Capitals in our downtown Capital One arena. We can and should work to do much more to support and lift our business community in the face of the current challenges and uncertainty. A few ways for your consideration. We need to continue to focus our efforts on attracting international direct investment in the district, creating business opportunities, and enhancing the city's competitive business environment. We must work to support additional public investments in local infrastructure to accommodate facilities-based and wireless connectivity and e-commerce across all 8 wards. We should continue to promote public sector grant and loan programs to facilitate district-based businesses, startups, entrepreneurship, growth for businesses of all sizes, job creation, and we should undertake an intensive process to assess the performance of our public agencies, especially those that directly impact the local business and employer community, identifying laws, regulations, policies, and practices that are ripe for streamlining and rationalization. We can no longer afford to impose burdens on district businesses, especially our small businesses and entrepreneurs. An excellent first step was when the council unanimously passed and recently funded groundbreaking legislation, making it simpler, faster, and cheaper to obtain a basic DC business license. However, various opportunities remain to reduce or reform regulatory regimes and associated agency practices that may be outdated or unnecessary or unnecessarily costly. Examples range from regulatory delays to costs associated with development and construction. Additionally, despite recent partial reforms, so-called clean hands restrictions remain a major barrier to local business enterprises, impacting our small businesses. Importantly, comparable clean hands barriers do not exist in either Maryland or Virginia, putting the district at an ongoing competitive disadvantage in comparison to our neighboring jurisdictions. So as a city, we must continue efforts to remove these unnecessary barriers to job creation and economic activity, including, as mentioned, reforming existing regulatory policies and practices. Ultimately, comprehensive reforms will lead to a more rational regulation and a more vibrant Washington, D.C. Finally, we encourage our city policymakers to work to reach a consensus on best ways to plan for and transition toward a more intentional process of evaluating current programs and identifying meaningful spending reductions in our budget. Recently enacted payroll sales and residential real estate taxes could pull an additional $400 million from the pockets of residents, employers, and workers. So we should examine that. The DC Chamber of Commerce looks forward to working with you, Councilmember McDuffie, Mayor Bowser, and the entire DC Council in finding solutions for the district's future growth, investment, and stability. Thank you for the opportunity to testify and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony this afternoon. We're going to go next to Aisha Bond. Good afternoon to you in testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman McDuffie, members of the committee, and distinguished guests. It is a pleasure to be here in front of you all today. My name is Aisha Bond, and I serve as the president and CEO of the Greater Washington, D.C. Black Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today about the challenges facing our local business community and the urgent need for stronger enforcement, streamlined process, and greater transparency in the procurement and economic development efforts. Local Black-owned businesses have faced systemic barriers that undermine their ability to scale, compete, and thrive. We must move beyond complacency and oversight gaps to ensure that procurement commitments, funding allocations, and workforce development efforts are realized in real time, not just in policy. In recent discussions, we have seen high-grossing businesses losing up to 60% of their revenue due to shrinking federal contracts. Black businesses in this city are struggling and are feeling the impact of shift and change. This economic contraction is felt deeply by small businesses across the district region. And while we're adapting and pivoting in response, we must also ensure that our workforce remains agile and has opportunities to develop skills in tech innovation and high-growth industries. It is my suggestion to this council to strengthen existing programs to fortify the district's commitment to small business. The following list identifies challenges that were highlighted directly from our members and personal accounts from our members in the local business area shared with us at the chamber in our various events and discussions. To begin, the CBE program there are challenges and lack of enforcement regarding the CBE program. The district has made important commitments to support certified business enterprises and local small business. However, enforcement of these commitments remains weak and inconsistent. CBEs are often overlooked in procurement decisions despite legal mandates. The waiver process is unregulated and left up to individual agencies without independent oversight, without comprehensive independent oversight. DSLBD, while doing an impressive job as an agency, is not an enforcement agency and does not track waivers effectively, leaving businesses with no clear path to accountability. Without a centralized tracking system for procurement and bids, CBEs lack visibility into real opportunity. To the Green Book and the OCP portal has accountability gaps. The Green Book and the Office of Contracting and Procurement portal were designed to provide transparency in procurement. However, tracking the follow-up remains inconsistent, making it difficult for businesses to assess agency compliance. Agencies failing to meet CBE contracting goals face no meaningful consequences. 3, cannabis industry. We have delayed implementation and barriers to success that we're witnessing. Cannabis industry presents a high potential economic opportunity for DC businesses, yet regulatory inefficiencies are delaying access and undermining entrepreneurship. The DC government allocated funding for 11 regulatory positions, but these positions remain unfilled. This inaction delays the licensing process and prevents businesses from moving forward. Entrepreneurs are given only 1 year to become operational, with no extensions despite slow agency processing times. Zoning restrictions are inconsistent and overly prohibitive, limiting access to viable locations for cultivation and manufacturing businesses. The approval process for the certificates of occupancy is slow and unclear at times, creating bottlenecks that directly impact business viability. Many cannabis license holders are facing expiration deadlines while still waiting on ABCA approvals. Without urgent action, these businesses may lose their licenses due to government inaction. And then we have the CIA DC STARS contract and the prime subcontractor relationship. The DC STARS contract under CIA was designed to help small business growth, but its execution has been flawed. Communication with local businesses has been inefficient. Instead of fostering business expansion, smaller projects are being developed without meaningful participation from CBEs. The short runway for project opportunities is preventing sustainable business growth. It is therefore my recommendation that we strengthen this economic resilience, enforcing CBE requirements and strengthening oversight by creating a clear enforceable structure for tracking and reporting on waivers, procurement, and CBE allocations. Grant DSLBD enforcement authority to ensure agencies comply with CBE spending requirements. To improve procurement transparency and communication, so establishing a centralized real-time tracking system to monitor CBE participation in contracting, require regular reporting and accountability measures for agencies failing to meet CBE procurement goals, supporting cannabis entrepreneurs through policy adjustments, expedite hiring for regulatory positions to ensure timely processing of applications, provide reasonable extensions for cannabis business owners working to become operational, expand zoning permission to allow districts case-by-case opportunities to engage in the cannabis entrepreneurship. Also ensuring CIA, DC STARS contract supporters are supporting local business by improving communication with businesses to ensure the program meets its intended goal and establish clear metrics to evaluate whether the contract is actually fostering business growth. In conclusion, economic resilience requires immediate action, and without stronger enforcement, transparency, and real-time implementation, small businesses, especially Black-owned businesses, will continue to be disadvantaged and or left behind. The Greater Washington, D.C. Black Chamber of Commerce stands ready to work with the council, certainly, to eliminate these barriers and create sustainable opportunities and build a stronger, more equitable business environment for all. Thank you for your time and welcome any questions you may have.
And thank you for your testimony this afternoon. Dr. Lowe.
Good afternoon, Chairman McDuffie, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to offer testimony and participate in this roundtable. In the written version of my remarks, you'll find plenty of data, as well as thoughts on the office market and housing, just to speak to some of the topics that came up in the earlier panels of this roundtable. But in my spoken remarks today, I'm going to focus on the need to revisit the city's existing policies to evaluate the extent to which the district is an easy place to start a business, be an employer, and grow a successful enterprise. In my testimony, I will highlight 3 ways DC can invest in placemaking and small business starts, growth, and retention that are totally under local control. A U.S. Chamber of Commerce analysis ranked DC number 7 of all states nationwide in business applications per capita in 2023. We are clearly an incredibly entrepreneurial city. However, the Chamber also noted that new business applications were down 5.6% in DC in 2023 year over year, while Maryland had 0.5% growth and Virginia had 2.7% growth. This is a warning sign that something is shifting in the business environment in DC. There are 3 ways to fix this. Number 1, offer pop-up permitting citywide. An individual trying to start a storefront business in DC doesn't just need a business license. They need a certificate of occupancy. It can take up to 14 months to get a certificate, and there is no cap on that process or timeline. For storefront businesses, that means paying rent for months, even over a year, before they can open. There is no case management or QA/QC for the inspection process. You can get different answers from different inspectors about one issue, and the answer you get from one isn't binding on another. Ultimately, that incentivizes noncompliance or pay to play. It also disadvantages disinvested neighborhoods that have older buildings and accumulated deferred maintenance. We need to reform that process. In the meantime, downtown DC has pop-up permits to make it easier for businesses to occupy spaces. These are basically temporary permits that you can get in one day. As a matter of both equity and economic development, why not make these available citywide? Number 2, maximize economic development investments in technical assistance to businesses. In the past few years, new laws have made major changes to the operating realities of storefront businesses in DC, from big changes like paid family leave and I-82 to banning straws and the Office of Human Rights anti-sexual harassment training course requirement. Any requirement where compliance is paid for by the business will result in business loss if it does not also provide return on investment to the business. Therefore, if the city changes operating realities, the city should also invest in technical assistance to businesses to both support compliance and grow returns. Right now, much of our assistance to small businesses is in the form of grants that we hope will help them grow. However, the public sector could also just reduce the amount of capital needed to start a business by simplifying the administrative startup process. There are also a lot of real reasons that a small business owner might not be ready to access capital, and providing technical assistance to entrepreneurs can make a difference. However, we've made limited and uneven investments in such technical assistance, primarily through our Main Street programs. The problem is, most of the city is not covered by a Main Street program. In addition, there's too much variation across Main Street programs in the extent to which they even provide technical assistance that is directed towards specific measurable goals related to business growth, such as reducing debt, growing revenue, growing customer base, buying real estate, etc. The city should overhaul small business and place-based economic development approaches to incentivize technical assistance and broaden the reach of providers who can demonstrate they are performing. Number 3, streeteries and vending are a chance to grow the pie. During the pandemic, being able to expand outdoors generated revenue for the city and businesses and created jobs. It makes sense to formalize streetery implementation for the long term. However, it's been 5 years since the pandemic started, and the updated streetery rules are still not available. In the meantime, businesses are investing tens of thousands of dollars in streeteries that may be rendered non-compliant in the future. In addition, the council's attempts to legalize vending are stuck in a multi-agency catch-22, where vendors can't get business licenses because they need health inspections, and can't get health inspections because they need business licenses. Our livable streets are an asset unique to the district in our region. We need to leverage them with guidelines that balance private sector costs against potential public risks. This current moment feels really full of never before unprecedented existential threats to the future of the district. But part of how to meet the moment is to address the hyperlocal parts of the district's unique value proposition that are most under our control and do our best to optimize them. That said, I'd like to co-sign the Greater Washington Partnership's testimony, which is highly consistent with Brookings Metro's work on rethinking regional economic development, which you can find linked in my written testimony. Thank you.
Thank you each for your testimony this afternoon. I think I know where I want to start on this panel. It's where you just left off. I've found quite challenging this notion of regional economic development. And, you know, when I was a member of the Council on Governments some years ago, it was my intention as chair for my year to focus on regional economic development. We unfortunately had to focus our energy and efforts on addressing the capital requirements that were necessary for WMATA. And so our energy went into identifying ways to fund those capital improvements. And since there's been focus on operational costs, et cetera, I say all that to say, Brookings Metro, Greater Washington Partnership, and every organization in between, how might the district better approach an effort toward regional economic development? Typically, you see sort of these competitions between regions. I always use the example of HQ2 when there was the effort of Amazon to relocate and identified our region. It seemed like it felt more of a competition because I think naturally every place in an area would like to land the big prize, such as HQ2. But what are ways specifically that you all have thought about that we might be able to work together across boundaries toward better regional economic development?
I'll offer just one initial thought, which is that in the Milwaukee region, you know, we're talking about, I think, a 7-county area and the city itself. You know, not quite as big as our region, but still, you know, many multiple jurisdictions. All of the local jurisdictions came together and signed a non-competition understanding in order to empower them to collaborate regionally as a group. And, you know, I think we have a particular challenge in our region, not just because of the number of local jurisdictions, but because we need to speak to 3 different state houses. So that is an additional wrinkle. But you are right that we cannot be successful until we get beyond competition and to collaboration.
Yeah. Sure.
I maybe just offer a couple of thoughts. I think first is, you know, healthy competition in lots of ways is wonderful and great. And I think we will never be in a place where whether it's the district or Maryland or Virginia is going to say we're not going to compete at all. But there are opportunities and moments where collaboration is needed and appropriate. And so I think the first step is identifying either what those moments are, and I would argue we are probably in one of those moments now, and then what those opportunities are. I mean, you spoke about HQ2, and that was something prior to my involvement with the Greater Washington Partnership that the partnership was very engaged in, right? Identifying that bringing HQ2 to the region would help the region more broadly, even if it was technically located in Virginia or Maryland. And our board partners and leading CEOs that are a part of GWP really did come together to focus that effort. And you can look just a couple of weeks ago as the Virginia Tech opened up its new innovation campus, right? That was part of that collaboration that included not only the private sector, but also educational institutions, as well as the public sector, right? And so I think one is you are collaborating not only across the region, but also cross-sectorally. Also, I would offer, if we think about this region more broadly, and we think about, as I'm sure we may talk about some growth industries, lots of folks talk about AI and innovation and how that will drive innovation. Northern Virginia globally is a center of data centers, which is, one of the things required to drive that innovation. The district proximity to that, the ability for businesses perhaps to leverage that proximity as they think about growing, utilizing sort of, again, regional resources. And there are probably a few industries that we could think about that perhaps are centered somewhere else in the region, but provide opportunities as we look at the data for DC to consider what its growth industries will be within that larger ecosystem.
Yeah. I can't remember which one of you it was, but somebody mentioned talent retention and development. I think it was you, Ms. Flowers. I think about the impact of some of the federal mandates and actions and layoffs. It is impacting the region, given the sort of outsized impact of federal employment on the district, Maryland, and Virginia. It just comes to mind as something that we should be thinking about when we think about talent retention development or engaging with those displaced workers to see where it might align with hiring in companies here in the District of Columbia or in Maryland or Virginia, particularly those counties that border us. And so I'm sort of thinking out loud. I don't know that I had a specific question around that, but when I think about sort of regional engagement, the impact is being felt by us all, not the district in a silo. So it might be useful for us to have conversations about how we help each other and help those workers who live in our jurisdiction. So I don't know if anybody has a response to that.
I did want to add to that and just share, certainly I echo the sentiment of my peers here at the table in many ways regarding the regional approach, particularly as you were just highlighting across industry as well as across the region at large. The Chamber has a partnership agreement with, I think, most of the chambers in this greater region, offering free membership into our chamber for any Black business that happens to be a member of another chamber. It's just a small gesture, but it's a way in which we make sure that our membership is robust and regional as a Greater Washington, DC chamber. Also, it's a way that we make sure that we have some insight into barriers to entry for businesses that are engaged in business in Maryland and Virginia and either thinking about and or not thinking about business in DC. It gives us a perspective and insight there. So there's some data collection aspects that are meaningful there as well. We also have been engaging in quite a few partnerships that echo and look like the partnership agreements that you were talking about, consortiums, collectives, et cetera, with multiple private, public, as well as academic spaces, really thinking about workforce development at large and upskilling and what we need as a community. And I'll echo or just close by saying, in addition to thinking about the region at large, really also thinking about advancing leadership and people who are in mid and top level positions to make sure that those people as well are working collectively, not just thinking about sort of the workforce development as a monolith or as a sort of one size fits all collective. So I would encourage more of that in the future.
Okay. I wanted to just ask about, so to keep it on this regional topic, because I think about how in many ways, Maryland and Virginia have successfully attracted technology-focused businesses within that industry, including biotechnology, at a rate far greater than the district. And I'm curious what we might be able to attribute that success to. I know there's been efforts in the District of Columbia in this administration and prior administrations to attract technology companies, and we've seen some success. But I guess I'm wondering if you all are having conversations with those types of businesses to understand barriers to entry, or in some cases, things that are helping to attract. I was at an event with you yesterday, Ms. Bond, where there was a company that recently located to the District of Columbia from another jurisdiction, and they talked about the soft landing program. So there are some things that we're doing, but I wonder if there's more we should be doing to attract those types of technology companies to the District of Columbia.
Yeah, I definitely agree that we could be doing more, and we are, as you've mentioned, looking at those emerging industries like AI, cybersecurity. The DC Chamber of Commerce is focused on startups and entrepreneurs who have an interest in those areas. So I definitely see an opportunity to work with, as you've mentioned, the soft landing program that we're also a part of, and partnering with agencies like DSLBD who are providing resources to some of those displaced federal workers.
I'll add that I think that some of our academic institutions are now becoming, ours in the district specifically, are becoming more aggressive about training and upskilling in the tech spaces. I think that in our surrounding neighbors, Maryland and Virginia, we've seen a little bit more of that. So we are engaged in a lot of conversations with those consortiums and the like to make sure that we're being very specific and detailed about what it looks like to make sure that the DC workforce community is not left behind in that space. Also focusing a lot of attention on bringing more dedicated tech-specific events to the district. I think we have a lot of times we lose out on those events to Maryland and Virginia. And so putting more of a concentrated effort in making sure that the district is recognized for its desire to be engaged in that work. And also, the many things that we do to support, development in that space.
I'd also just offer, I think there is an opportunity to pursue some collaborative models that bring together sort of the full ecosystem. A lot of the work that we do, we actually begin sort of K-12, right? And so we also have a partnership with the district where we're bringing in resources through our K-12 program to introduce students to different tech opportunities. But when you think about that full ecosystem, you may have employers at the top, but there's employers, there are, post-secondary education, there is the K-12 education below that, and opportunities for more collaboration during that ecosystem really then sets the district up to being a place where we not only have all of the amenities and other things that are going to draw workers here, but have that skilled workforce to support burgeoning businesses and enterprises as we, again, consider what our growth industries are going to be.
I will just very briefly reinforce that point. Effective economic development isn't about just going out fishing and trying to get what we don't have, right? It's about growing from within based on the assets that we do have. So when it comes to sectors, that's about emerging sectors that we already have some strength in and trying to help them get bigger. To the extent that we want to pursue sectors that we don't think we have enough of, it's about talent across sectors. What employers say the biggest factor in their location decisions is access to talent. And so that has to begin with workforce development.
Appreciate it.
And I'll just add, there seems to be a gap, obviously, between what corporations, companies, and businesses need and the workforce that we are bringing before them. And so we're working to identify what those gaps are, but we're finding more often than not, many of the training programs that we have in place are training workers in a way that don't match a job need of a business or a corporation. And so we are sort of all shooting at the wrong target, instead of working collaboratively to have some real understanding of what skills we specifically truly need that training force to have.
I appreciate that. And I think that's an appropriate segue to turn it to Councilmember Bonds. But I want to mention along that point around workforce development, Councilmember Bond, as the chair of our committee, has been doing an immense job of sort of coordinating the efforts that are happening across the District of Columbia. I just recently met with Monica Dodge, who's the executive director of the Office of Education through Employment Pathways. And I think it falls under OSSI, but a lot of what they're doing is helping to identify, coordinate across some of the workforce development programs in the District of Columbia. And so we are seeing actual strides, and I think the data that they're going to be collecting is going to be critical in informing sort of what some of those workforce development programs and how we're allocating those resources looks like into the future. And so I wanted to just lift up the work that Councilmember Bonds is doing on that front as I turn it to you for a round.
I appreciate that so very much.
Can I
And
miss,
as-
Councilmember Bonds, I'm sorry, I meant to mention before I turn to you that we've been joined by Ward 7 Councilmember
Of
and member of
course.
this committee, Wendell Felder. So I want to recognize you. We'll turn to you around for a round after Councilmember Bonds. Sorry about
All
that.
right,
Councilmember Bonds.
thank you very, very much. I was just thinking, my goodness, I want to invite each of you to come and talk about how do we transition our society to the new normal of having to look at industries that are real and the training modules that would lead us to helping those that are in the city, our residents, but also thinking regionally, how can we make sure we have talent that can produce and help our economy grow? So I'm really excited to know that you want to talk about this more. I think it's a tremendous opportunity for us. Not to say we haven't been like stuck in the mud for a while, but we have. And how do we get up and out of it? And so I think you're offering a breath of fresh air so that we can move forward. So I'm hoping you'll all be available in next couple of weeks. I think maybe having this conversation before we move to April 2nd, budget, and certainly before we move to, I think, June 11th, last vote would be very helpful because our resources, as you know, are a little maybe tapped in a different way. And so we want to make sure that we have what we need to at least for once not just have the conversation, but to begin to move the pieces in that direction. We frequently have the conversation and then 8 years later, we're moving the pieces. We do not have that luxury now.
May I?
Yes, please.
Councilmember Bonds, just wanted to share a couple of things for your consideration. At the Greater Washington Partnership, towards the late part of last year through this year, we went through an exercise called skills forecasting, right? Which now this is prior to some of the changes that we're discussing today in terms of the market dynamics, but looked at, what those skills, exactly what this conversation is, created this tool and data to identify what the skills are, specifically within this region, specifically that private employers are looking for, and really provide that, and it's available, and we want people to use that data because we really believe that being data-driven is what is going to drive sustainable solutions. So we have that skills forecasting work that identified a number of cross-cutting skills as well as some industry-specific skills. And so happy to share that with your office as well. We also host something called our employer signaling system, where we work again with the private sector and with our academic institutions, both 2-year, 4-year colleges and universities, to identify specifically what those skills are that private employers are looking for. Our employer signaling system is very focused in the tech field, as well as where academic institutions can support, whether it is specific classes, et cetera, to support those skills. That is something that we refresh every couple of years, so we're going to be going through our refresh on that. But those are the kinds of tools and insights that we want to share with the community, the broader community, as you are considering what some of the programs and policies you are looking to implement. So I wanted to just offer that. And then the last thing I just wanted to say, I mentioned it in my testimony, but I do think as we're thinking about the changing dynamics, the federal workforce is highly skilled, and there are opportunities to match with what existing job opportunities there are, right? And so that is one way to retain that talent. There are opportunities to find what we're sort of skill adjacency. So while that job may not be exactly, right on, there are adjacent skills that would allow somebody to transition into a new position relatively quickly and seamlessly. And then there will be moments where there is reskilling that might be required, and then identifying what those are and what the best pathways for reskilling are to meet what the demand is within the broader private sector. So just wanted to offer those for consideration.
I really appreciate that, and I will be following up most definitely. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to compliment what I hear being discussed quite a bit now, more than before, is the apprenticeship program. It seems to be highly effective. So just taking a look at what that is doing different and distinct from some of the other programs, I think might be a great starting point. I hear quite a bit from the businesses in our membership that there often is a mismatch, but I think that people are targeting specific workforce groups and really thinking diligently about how that particular group could be aligned with a particular agency, entity, whatever it might be. And I think that's another approach. For example, the veteran community, thinking about, contracts with DOD and, places that would be a natural fit and alignment for them. So just echoing again, the apprenticeship program really has been amazing for a lot of especially smaller businesses. So those opportunities are, very attractive moving forward.
I really apologize to the committee, but I have to leave. We have 3 mayors visiting Brookings Metro today, and I have to be there at 1 to greet them.
Appreciate your time. Sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Has any thought been given to how we can re-employ senior citizens? Seniors are in my committee, and I get that all the time. And it's not about a bona fide salary. It's about, I need to use the skills I acquired. I need to use my expertise. I just need to be out with people again. That's what I'm hearing. So how can we do that? I remember years ago, we had something called professional core. I remember when I started in government, there was something like that that existed decades ago. I wonder if that have any reference to that.
I mean, I hate to say I don't have a great suggestion, but what I can say is that we hear that all the time as well. So many of our business owners are looking for somebody who's been there, done that, and really needs the support and insight of someone who has the time and has the, obviously the intellectual insights that would be specifically meaningful to their business trajectory. So we would absolutely love to think about ways in which we can implement and attract, the senior community to re-engage, the work world and the business world.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I also hear that in our business community. And while I'm just 3 weeks into the job, I'm happy to take that back to our workforce committee to make it a priority to find ways to re-engage our senior community who have a lot of valuable skills to offer.
Yes. Well, thank you all. Thank you very much. And I'm saving 2 minutes to pass on to the chairman,
Appreciate
and
it.
he'll pass it on. Thank you very
Councilmember
much.
Bonds. I'm going to turn to Councilmember Felder for a round.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, panelists. As we all heard today, the district is facing unprecedented challenges. Not only are we anticipating a reduction in our revenue, but federal interference in our local budget threatens our ability to maintain and grow our economy. Despite these challenges, economists and history have taught us that public spending is still necessary. And in fact, the bedrock of our economy, it enables us to continue to provide essential services such as keeping our community safe, providing a high-quality education, strengthening our transportation infrastructure, and even investing in our workforce. Given that, my question for this panel will be centered around the best ways to use public dollars to make investments that continue to generate revenue during an economic downturn. So with that, I'll jump right in. Given the projected decline in revenue relative to economic growth, what specific challenges should DC implement to enhance its revenue streams?
Just one way. I mean, you brought up very valid points because this is going to create a budget crisis for us and really undermine all the decades of economic growth. And I think it's important for us to all work together to ensure we're making tough choices on legislation for this moment in time and to consider bills that will not burden or hamper or hinder small businesses, entrepreneurs, or any startup businesses. So I really think we need to be on a united front in that area and ensure that we're supporting the for just to protect the economic growth that's been already preserved for the several years and to continue to support all of our businesses across all 8 wards.
I'll add, I mentioned in my testimony, and you may have an opportunity to see that at some point, but there are quite a few places where I think that putting dollars towards perhaps additional employees who could be engaged in enforcement and tracking of business engagement with things like the CBE process or other processes that business owners are, consistently and regularly facing and interfacing, I should say, and dealing with. There has been a lot of, business testimony that rises to my ear that speaks to, a lack of understanding of who is tracking and how the council keeps itself aware of gaps, for example, that exist between opportunity and actually seizing the deal and moving forward. So my suggestion would be to be thinking about spaces where, for example, with the LBD, there could be certain enforcement, components that are a part of oversight that may not exist at this time. So.
Thanks. I guess I would just offer, and we talked about it a bit. I think that for the business community writ large, predictability, ease, the ability to sort of streamline process, as well as a level of surety and accountability. I think maybe it was Dr. Lowe who mentioned, you might go into a process as a business owner, and it sort of feels like, sort of a black box, right? Whether you are a small business or a larger business, without sort of equal sides of accountability. I will just speak personally prior to, this is not GWP, but as when I was an entrepreneur, if I didn't get something in on a day, all of a sudden there was a fine. But when you are looking to do business with the district, something that might, somewhere else take 3 months or 6 months or 18 months, you might not know what that time frame is. And the ability to have that level of predictability and surety and transparency for businesses small and large, I think is something that is a place to focus. At the Greater Washington Partnership, we really believe in being data-driven. I've sort of said that a number of times, but I do think as you are looking at resources within this this budget cycle, the opportunity to leverage that data. There's lots of folks who are, whether it is us, other people on the panel, who have that to offer, but to be founded in that data as you think about how to prioritize investments and incentives, I think is really critical. Because as we've talked about, the economic diversity for the District of Columbia and the region more broadly is critical for how our region continues to grow. And it is in the best interest, I think, of the entire region and the district specifically, that we focus on those growth industries where we have the best opportunities for success. And coming to that informed by the data is one of the best ways to get there.
Could either one of you speak to the role you envision for public-private partnerships in bolstering the district's revenue and helping achieve social outcomes?
I think that there are obviously a number of examples of public-private partnerships within the District of Columbia. Whether you think about large-scale economic development projects or real estate projects or collaborating to bring in either new businesses or retaining businesses. I think that the opportunity is twofold. One is that there's always an opportunity to collaborate when folks have mutual shared interests and people are clear about what their values are going into that process. And so I think that this is an opportunity to really be open and expand the way that folks think about those partnerships. The other piece that I mentioned earlier is that there are these larger ecosystems. And so again, are we bringing in our academic partners? Are we bringing in our private sector partners? Are we bringing in our community partners? And that all of those folks having a seat at the table, again, with sort of a shared vision and values, I think is one of the will result in successful collaborations.
Considering the potential need for additional revenue, what are the most viable sources for this funding? And what challenges do you think may arise in securing this additional funding? I know.
Well, could you repeat the first part of the question?
Absolutely. Considering the potential needs for additional funding,
Mhm.
what are the most viable sources for this funding?
I think from our perspective, from what I'm hearing from our members, really focusing efforts on looking at international opportunities in the district, creating business opportunities that can enhance our competitive business environment, and working to support public investments in our local infrastructure to accommodate facilities-based and e-commerce across all of our wards.
Okay.
That's just a few. Mhm.
How can the district balance the urgency or increasing revenue and spending with the needs for fiscal responsibility and sustainability? I know.
Increase the needs, repeat the first part again.
When you're talking about balancing, you're talking
Balancing.
about
Yes, like
balancing.
balancing the urgency with limited funding, but at the same time needing to expand, bring the right public-private partnerships to the table. Doing that while also balances fiscal's responsibility, meaning delivering city services and still being sustainable at the same time.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it is a
Yeah.
lot. I mean, and I was going to say, it really takes more consideration, in part, but in short, and I may not offer it as eloquently as my peers here, but ultimately, I think being very targeted in how and when we're, spending those funds on roles and oversight that really is making it easier. For example, a colleague was just talking about pop-ups. We've had just recently a whole panel discussion and some events at the chamber just about the pop-up process. And, when we reduce that conversation down, what we discover is like, if there was one person who really was a liaison for this was a creative economies conversation. So for the creative economy community, for example, to the real estate community, that one person could make a vast difference in all of those businesses and opportunities and streamline the process. So I think, again, it really is about targeting where the gap is and just pinpointing roles that could alleviate some of those challenges internally within systems that already exist here, within agencies and structures that already exist. So not reinventing the wheel, if you will, but really just drilling down on what the data suggests is the pain point for whatever the particular industry or, community is.
Yeah, in addition to that, finding easier ways to navigate this regulatory processes in the city. Also looking at public sector grant and loan programs. I think that also can facilitate district-based businesses, startups, entrepreneurships, and growth of all sizes is another way to, I think, support and work together to alleviate some of those issues.
I appreciate that. I want to be mindful of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Felder. I think we have gotten a lot out of this roundtable. I had a couple more questions, but I think what I'll do is make sure that we're following up with each of the witnesses. I want to thank you all for your testimony this afternoon and your patience, because you all have been here since this morning. But I think it underscores both the sense of urgency to come up with some solutions, given the plight of the district because of the external factors on the federal side that we discussed thoroughly throughout today, and the need to be more collaborative, both across district agencies with, public-private solutions, as well as regionally, which I think this panel really hit on. So I really appreciate y'all's time today. I think the district is going to have to think about how we reevaluate some of our existing policies to better understand why neighboring jurisdictions experience greater success in attracting capital investment and enact changes that will perhaps bring back investment to the District of Columbia that made us the darling in the early 2000s. I know this panel in particular has been here for some decades and know what I'm referring to. I think what we heard about the regulatory processes and how they should be streamlined to reduce existing barriers to residential and commercial development within the district is also something that struck me throughout the course of today's hearing with witnesses. I also want to reference the need for greater resources and how they should be utilized to spur industry investments and international business opportunities, which I know was mentioned by some of the witnesses on this panel. So I want to thank, again, each of you and all the witnesses who testified today. I look forward to additional collaboration. I want to thank my colleagues who are able to join today as well for making this a meaningful roundtable. With that, there being no further business before the Committee on Business and Economic Development, the time is now 1:05 p.m. Submissions of those who were not able to testify today but who would like to do so for the record may do so until 5 p.m. on March 21st, 2025. Those submissions should be made via the council's hearing management system on the website that the council maintains, dccouncil.gov. Again, there'll be no further business before the committee. This marks the end of today's public roundtable. The time is 1:06 p.m. and this hearing is adjourned.